The Knight of Wands is a really powerful and passionate card, showing this knightly figure appearing to be moving really fast throughout this sky, emblazoned by the warmth of the sun behind him. On the Rider-Waite deck we can see something a little bit more sedate, and yet the knight appears to be surveying the area with a confidence that he is travelling in the right direction, and he's making quite strong strides towards it, holding the wand in his hand, a symbol of his passion here. And it seems to be quite a stoic and wise knight, and indeed these cards, these knight's cards, can be found in the Sephiroth of Shokmar in the Tree of Life, and this is associated with wisdom. And here on the Knight of Wands, it's the wisdom of gathering this raw power that we saw with the Ace of Wands and putting it out there. So it's like saying, get up on your feet and make something happen, and you have to have the knowledge and the wisdom and the understanding that inspiration is coming into us in order to actually make it work. Otherwise inspiration could be coming from all over and we can't recognise it. And so that's what we're seeing there with that. The horse is going to be the main symbol upon this, and it really does look like it's galloping at some speed towards its goal, and we can see a crest upon the horse, and this, as well as the horse itself, is said to represent the energy of Mars. And if we think about Mars in terms of astrology, we can see many similarities to the actual meaning of the Knight of Wands card. And so Mars is all about passion and determination in terms of its astrological characteristics. Its energy is, like we were just saying, about standing up and getting things done. It's really inspiring us with confidence and saying we have got the power to go out and put energy into things. But of course, on the other side of that, it can venture over into a type of aggression or wrath, a sort of animal instinct, the instinct of fighting and survival to get away from things which of course would stop us from manifesting our will, and so it could be positive or negative based upon the actual situation. And yet, so the horse here is that Mars energy, inspiring the rider upon it, and in fact actually carrying the rider away with it, because we can see here that the horse has so much energy that the rider is actually hanging on to the reins for dear life. He hasn't actually got full control over this horse, and this is a really interesting symbol upon this card. It suggests that the energy may be difficult to tame, to rein in, and so the energy may be somewhat impulsive, which is something that we see with the Mars energy, of which the horse encapsulates. And indeed, this card represents a masculine energy, and so it can be a very brave and indeed revolutionary card associated with invention and finishing tasks and things like that, and yet it can easily tip the balance into a hot temper, for example, or a type of aggressiveness. And so this horse is a real free spirit, but it's important to keep control of the reins and to stop it from taking our rider perhaps on a journey of which he didn't want to go on, or didn't mean to actually embark upon. The card is full of fire, however, and so it's really showing the fire of passion. He is actually clothed in a cloak of flame, a cloak of fire, and there's other flame symbols as well which we will come to. And so his actual cloak is suggesting that if we rode this horse, the cloak would billow out behind us, and so he's leaving this trail of fire. He's literally a trailblazer. He is going forward, cloaked with the fire of passion, the fire of energy, and he's holding in his hands a large wand, of which actually represents the Ace of Wands, and in fact the energy here is quite similar. The symbol of the wand here connects to the groin area, and it's a phallic symbol. It's a clear representation of the energy of the phallus, even the way the actual hand is placed upon this wand, and it's out in front of him because it is bursting forth with the very fast-flowing creative seed of life itself, and perhaps that's what he is actually driving towards here. We can see the horse's mane and his hair, which again appear like flames, are coming forward in the same direction as the phallic symbol and of the rest of the trajectory of the horse, and so there's a wind at his back. It's not fighting against him. He's being carried effortlessly throughout this environment, and so returning to the phallic symbol there, it's suggesting that race to be the seed that will manifest, that will, in this regard, impregnate the earth, and indeed his cloak symbol could be traced into a very rough shape of a pyramid, and we can see pyramids upon the Rider-Waite card as well. This is the pregnant earth and is our dualistic counterpart to this very masculine energy that we have on this card. So we can see that, of course, the end goal and the only way it's actually going to be manifested at all is if its counterpart is actually impregnated with this creative seed. Now, it's a particularly powerful one, this, because the Knight of Wands is often associated with going on a journey, and we can see here on the tail of the horse these flames, and there are actually 7 flames visible here upon the horse's tail, and these are the 7th Sephiroth upon the Tree of Life, of which is Netzach, and this is the centre of the instincts and the emotions that come up in our hearts because of the instincts that we have, and it's often a very pure and extremely creative energy, and yet because of that it's a bit all over the place. It can flourish in illusion and it can be out of balance. It's an energy that needs to be harnessed and taken control of, just like we can see upon the horse. And so indeed, if we actually look again just to trace this onto the flames at the end of his wand, we can see 8 flames upon the wand. And so this is the next Sephiroth over from Netzach, the 8th of which is Hod. And so this is the counterbalance. This brings intellect and logic and a sense of structure to that creative energy that we've actually got. And so Hod here is concerned with the formulation of form, of manifestation. It's about taking the will and the intellect and changing it into something that physically exists. And so as a phallic symbol, this is perfect for Hod, because that's what it is. It's a very masculine energy, and it's all about giving form and bringing that seed of life into things. And so Netzach and Hod are deeply connected, and they're like a couple. And so let's have a look at this Knight of Wands going on a journey, which is one of the main symbols upon the Knight of Wands. It looks like he is travelling, of course, here from right to left in a somewhat diagonal looking pattern upon the card. And so behind him is the tail of the horse, of which is Netzach, that raw, furious energy of passion, and he's moving through that towards Hod, the next energy, to give it form. And so if we look at these as time and place, or we could also look at them as force and form, so they come together in balance and harmony, and either of them without the other is of course out of balance and therefore doesn't quite work. And so the actual journey this horse and rider are going upon is one of the paths upon the Tree of Life. It's actually the 27th path, Netzach to Hod, and we can read about this actually within the Yetziratic text as follows. The 27th path is the active or exciting intelligence, and it is so called because through it every existent being receives its spirit and motion. And I think that's actually a rather beautiful depiction of the Knight of Wands in itself, and the many different things of which it can actually mean. It's actually quite a simple card. It really is that getting up and going forth upon this journey through life, and we can see this echoed again upon the reins on the horse. If we have a look at the mouthpiece upon these reins, it has a sun image upon it, and up from there, on near the eye or near the where the ear would be on the horse, is what looks like a moon symbol. Now it's actually the horse crest that we've seen before, and yet the crescent underneath, as formed by the wings, also forms the crescent moon. I'm going to return to those wings in a moment. But for now, let's just stay with this. This represents the path that we should be looking at. The moon here is the intuition and the intellect, and in many regards the way of which we feel about things. And so that's that spark of a creation of an invention, which is something this card can represent, that spark that comes into our mind that says, hey, that hasn't been done before, and we have to put it down into action, into the mouth area where the sun comes out. So we have to speak in light and beauty and truth, our intentions and our intuitions. We have to put them into being, shout them out into the world in a form of which is bathed in light and truth. Otherwise, you're speaking in illusions. And so that winged horse as well shows up upon the crown of the helmet upon the knight as well. And so that's in the space of Samadhi, the enlightened mind, or the space of Kether on the Tree of Life. This is the formless, pure area where the spirit is housed upon these designs often. And a winged horse, that's a beautiful image. It's a very powerful symbol. We often associate it with Pegasus in Greek art and literature. It was about the immortality of the soul, and so of reaching new heights with this type of awareness of our nature and our true will in many regards. And in more contemporary images, Pegasus is all about poetic inspiration, and it's about that finding wonder and beauty in the world in that way. And so again, it's talking about grabbing hold of those reins of something to inspire us, something to drive us on our journey. And because we have to speak in the sun, it has to be virtuous and pure and formed out of light, this journey. And when we do that, when we put everything together, we connect Netzach and Hod and all the rest of that type of thing, our journey is going to move along very, very quickly. In fact, the wind is going to be at our back, like we can see upon this card, and we will be bathed in a cloak of flame, of which is connected to us, and so it's going to travel with us. It's all going to be very sudden, this energy, when we actually put everything together. And so it's really a bit like all the parts have come together, all the cogs have been slotted in, and now they're starting to turn. Things are starting to move forward, and that's really the energy of the Knight of Wands card here on the Thoth deck. The Queen of Wands is a really quite fascinating card. She, as a queen, represents the watery aspect of a particular suit, and so the watery aspect of fire, the Wands cards, may seem contradictory, because fire and water are usually against each other in elemental symbology. And so we have here a very strong card, of which may have a type of imbalance in her actual makeup, crossing between her light side and her darker side, as well as some other symbols. And indeed we can see that on the Rider-Waite version of this card, with the checkerboard pattern here upon her dress, and her fiery aspect implied by this sunflower, of which she holds, and yet also this black cat at her feet, of which is her instinct and her intuition, of which is something of which she really excels in. And this is also because that watery aspect of fire symbol can mean that, of course, the watery part of the element is its spirit, and so spiritual matter. If fire is form, which is something we've seen throughout these Wands cards, then its watery aspect is a spiritual form. And spiritual form is what we would call our intuition and our instinct and our emotions. And as we've seen with writers such as Napoleon Hill, truly thoughts are things. And so our thoughts, our emotions, and what we feel in our heart are not just idle fancies of the body or of the mind, but are a type of spiritual matter. If we could see them, they would be made up of a solar energy, a conscious energy of which pervades all things. And so here on the Thoth version of the Queen of Wands, we can see all sorts of fascinating symbology to that nature. She is centred in Benar, upon the Tree of Life, as are all of the queens, and so it represents a different type of energy to the Knight of Wands that we saw before, where he wasn't in full control of his horse and was kind of charging onwards with this immense energy. Here she's able to act with more restraint and self-reflection, and has gained a great deal of wisdom because of that. And here Benar could be like a great womb of the universe, and this is a symbol I'm going to return to later in the video. So it receives that force of Shokmar and gives it form, and so it actually nurtures the energies and those emotions we've spoken about, and then gives birth to them in form. But Benar is also ruled by Saturn, of which governs time and impermanence here in the physical world, and so as well as giving birth to form and creation, that form is going to be subject to decay and death and in a type of impermanence. And so there we have that alleged imbalance between the two different dualities there straight away. And indeed, because of that type of thing, our queen here is very wise, and we can see these 12 rays of light shining out from behind her crown, behind her head here, and these are the 12 different signs of the zodiac. It shows that she's open to connect to the universe and all of its energies and all of its different experiences, of which have come and gone for millennia. And it shows that she has walked many different paths. Perhaps she's had a lot of issues in life if it was somebody walking the same type of path that we do, and so she's able to have lived through a lot of things. And because of that, she will relate well to people of whom she meets, because she's had those experiences herself. And so it's showing that there's going to be a real compassion and an empathy, because all the different paths of the zodiac, all the different ways of experiencing the world, are part of her mind here, part of her consciousness, and she understands them. And in the deeper Thelema mythology, and indeed seen on the Aeon card over on the Major Arcana, we can see these 12 signs of the zodiac as representing the sky goddess Nuit. And so she who gives birth to the stars, and she wears the stars in her hair, and it goes back to what we were saying about actually giving birth to creation, a true mother goddess of whom actually takes hold of that unmanifested stuff of the universe and makes it true, makes it real. And the queen is sitting upon a throne made out of fire. And so this is completely different to the Knight. Yet again, here she's actually got control over the fire. She's sitting upon it and exerting a type of dominance over it, and which can mean, in the more negative aspects of the card, that she may impose her will upon other people. And yet on the positive side, it's showing a real self-determination and an independence and a type of ambition, that she's risen above the wily and wild nature of fire, and now she sits on top of it as a throne and is able to control where these flames go. And of course, if you could control where flames go, you can control what is burnt or what not is burnt in a kind of metaphysical nature. Crowley actually describes this in the Book of Thoth as that the fire is a geometrical light ruled by her material power, and beneath the throne the surging flames are steady, suggesting, of course, with steady flames, that she has mastery over them. And you could only have mastery over an element if you have first got mastery over yourself. And so we've heard this type of things in the wider world in very simple terms, like don't go out and put the world to rights if you can't clean up your own room first, that type of thing. And so in order to have control over the elements, she also has control over herself first, and so that's why she's very approachable and very wise. Now, the actual clasp on her cloak is rather interesting, in that it's quite scaly and almost appears like a fish. And so indeed, this is a representation of that watery element of which we've spoken about, and astrologically is Pisces, which of course is intuition yet again, and also sensitivity and that compassion and empathy of which she almost certainly embodies here upon the card. One of the most fascinating symbols on this card is the wand with the pine cone, of which she holds. And this is the thyrsus, of which is associated with Bacchus or Dionysus, and therefore is going to be connected with the elements of this deity, of which can be euphoria and wine making and the intoxication of the spirit, a type of wonderful liberation and enjoyment of life, and a very empowering type of symbol, and also quite a fertile symbol as well, and just about the enjoyment of life. And so in some ways it's almost like a phallic symbol, and the pine cone could represent that seed of life coming forth from there. And yet there's a lot more to this as well, because the pine cone can also be the pineal gland, and so that small part of the brain, of which is located in the epithalamus, of where the two halves or hemispheres of the brain come together. So it's in that central part of the brain in a space of duality, and due to the shape of this gland it's also known as the conarium, and hence the pine cone. It's thought to be in some ways connected with the Ajna chakra, or the third eye, and therefore is concerned with the viewing and sensitivity to unseen worlds and orders of being existing around us. And it may be the seat of our inspiration, our inspired thoughts, of which we have to put out into that womb of the universe in order to manifest them. And we can see this with the fact that the Queen's eyes are closed. She's in that world of imagining, in that world of dreams, and she too is intoxicated with the enjoyment of life and all of the many different experiences of which she has seen and worked through and accomplished up in her existence. The Bacchus image may also be related to the wider tarot story, and specifically that of the Fool, in that the Fool becomes enraptured with everything around him in terms of the universe that he is exploring. And yet he's not quite understood the entire universe. He's just figuring out as he goes, and so there's an innocence to the Fool. And it's a wonderful innocence because it enables one to enjoy all of the wonders and beauties of life without imposing a type of imprisonment of ideology upon them, or that type of thing. And indeed, this queen is very wise, and so she's going to have seen through all that type of thing. And indeed we can see that she has this large cat like a leopard by her side, and it's very different from the black cat shown on the Rider-Waite cards. And yet in the wider mythology of the Queen of Wands, it's said that she used to walk with a panther beside her, and as she went through all these experiences in the universe and learned about things, the panther turned into a leopard. And the reason for that is that the leopard remained, of course, with its spots as a reminder of the dark things of which she'd experienced in the universe, and the spots never change. They're always there to remind her of those things and of course to learn from them. And yet there's a lot of different meanings to this leopard symbol. I really like it. It's quite a powerful looking symbol here, and in some ways this is similar to the throne of which we saw before, where she's got everything under control, and so everything's in fire and quite a fierce force as well with the leopard, and she's got it all controlled. She's got her hand here on the leopard, and it's not charging off and biting people or anything like that. It's quite restrained, it's in repose, and it seems to be as wise as she is, and it's almost taking on her calmness and her knowledge. And yet in more metaphysical terms, this cat could also be associated with the dark goddess, and so we're going back to that duality, and so a type of goddess archetype of which may be more concerned with a type of intuition such as those of the moon, and perhaps in some ways the darker elements of the type of things of which we've spoken about. And also in this wider sense, and this is where it becomes rather strange, we've spoken about the goddess Nuit, and in contemporary science they talk about dark matter, of which is supposed to be this difficult to detect matter, of which makes up almost 85% of the entire universe, called dark because it doesn't seem to interact with the rest of the universe. It doesn't reflect or absorb light and electromagnetic radiation and so on. And dark matter in this regard is the Dark Mother, a sky goddess. And of course we have here a fire goddess, and so what she's doing is impregnating that dark matter with the energy of light, of which is of the electromagnetic field, and so is making that matter absorb, reflect and emit light. And so she really is impregnating the universe with the very first sparks of fire, of which is form. And if we look at the beginnings of the universe, even in contemporary ideas, it's something similar. Something has to have impregnated this universe with all of the wonders of experience. And perhaps this universe has been born many, many times and ended many, many times. And so our goddess, with those 12 signs of the zodiac around her, really does represent all these types of experiences, all the comings and goings of a universe forever in flux. And so when you draw her in your readings, I think she's quite wonderful. It's about a journey of self-discovery, and it's a reminder to you that you are, in your own way, powerful just as she is, and you're going through your own microcosm of different experiences in the universe, and you have to learn from them, and they will form as spots like on the leopard, of which will perhaps never go, but you will learn from them, and you can go through those difficult times and look back upon them as a stronger person, having grown wise because of them. And so she's asking us to express our beauty and natural power of ability to create form. And she invites us to take that intoxication of the spirit and of life, to be determined and focused in our own goals, and to have no doubt that we really can make the whole universe move and manifest to the rhythm of our hearts. The Prince of Wands is an ambitious card showing a character of leadership charging forward into the fires of life and of experience. On the Rider-Waite deck we can see a King of Wands sitting upon his throne, with symbols behind him of which show the strong Leo symbology upon this card, as well as two symbols here of which suggest infinity, those being the Ouroboros and the Salamander, which could represent the endless rebirth of experience. Whether this is planets and universes themselves, collapsing cosmoses endlessly reborn, or incarnations of our own bodies as we desire to experience the tastes, sounds and pleasures of this life. And indeed, our prince upon the card is charging forward into that fire of passion and of life itself. On the Tree of Life, he is centred in Tifereth, of which means beauty, and with regards to him, could represent the beauty of this experience. More metaphysically, Tifereth here is also suggestive of a harmony or a balance, because we have already experienced both sides of the pillars upon the Tree of Life, and so we have seen severity, and we have also seen mercy. We've experienced, perhaps to a base level, and yet still we understand some of how the world behaves, and so we say, I understand it, and so I'm going to go out and conquer it, which doesn't necessarily mean in any type of warlike status, but can simply mean to take hold of your desires and to see them through, to taste that fruit of the tree, so to speak. And that's what the prince is actually doing here. You can see that his eyes are open, and a lot of the Minor Arcana cards here on the Wands suit have their eyes closed. They're in a period of meditation, and yet here his eyes are open. He is viewing the physical world around him, and so he's centered in the realm of form and of physical, touchable reality around us. He wears a crown or a helmet upon his head, of where we can see the first of two symbols showing the strong suggestion and influence of Leo upon this card. So we can see a lion with many different wings here coming out of it, and yet this isn't actually the main symbol here upon the helmet. That is the 11 rays of which are emanating behind him. Most of these cards show 12 points or rays representing the 12 signs of the zodiac, and so all of the experiences of the universe. And yet here we have 11 instead, and so this is a very esoteric number 11, and you can actually see it in almost all mysticism and occultism and so on if you look into it. For instance, there are 11 words in the law of Thelema: do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. We may also see 11 letters in the word abrahadabra, and indeed, abracadabra is often the first magic word that children learn, and they say abracadabra when they're doing little spells and magic tricks, unaware that perhaps they are actually uttering great mystical secrets and innocent expressions of sacred law. We can also see 11 being the number of letters in Ra Hua Kuit, of which is the child of the sky goddess Nuit and the earth god Hajit. And so we see here a type of wondrous duality, of which we will return to, of course, because we have the sky goddess Nuit, a firmament, a protective mother over the earth, coming and literally touching her hands, meeting with the earth god Hajit upon the plane of the earth, and their child is born inside this earth, of which provides obviously oxygen and food and everything of which they would need to exist, to incarnate and to experience. If we even take this further, we could say that the character upon the card is performing the great work of a hermeticism, of which is the joining of the microcosm and the macrocosm. And so if we have a look at the pentagram and of the hexagram brought together to create the rose and the cross, we can yet again see, of course, 5 and 6, bringing us to 11. That this character is a Thelemite in himself, he is doing his will, can be shown here with this pendant or seal of which he is wearing, and is positioned around the space of the heart upon his chest. And this shows the Star of Babylon together with the mark of the beast. This is in itself a very popular sigil within Thelema, and if we look at them separately, we can see this is actually quite a simple symbol. And so upon the Star of Babylon, we can see in its centre here the shape of the Vesica Pisces, a shape of which shows up, of course, all over the universe and all over esoteric symbolism. And so this is the symbol of the Yoni. If we then have a look at the mark of the beast, this shows a singularity in its centre and an expanding universe, and yet as a whole it is clearly a phallic image. Indeed, it is a phallic image pointing directly at the viewer, and this is the symbol of the Linga. And so if we put them together, we have the Yoni and the Linga, or the womb and the phallus. And so what he is wearing around his chest here is a deeply creative symbol, showing the union of which we discussed previously with Nuit and Hajit, and also the union of which brought us all into this incarnation, of which we're in the process of living out right now, of course, as we watch this very video. It also shows that this is a very masculine image, the phallus symbol coming out towards the viewer, so to speak, and the image on the card showing to be striding again towards the viewer if we were actually holding the card. And so it's a masculine symbol of putting out a seed of life, and that race to be the seed of life which succeeds and actually creates and kickstarts that birthing and conception process. And so he's also completely naked, apart from his crown with those 11 magical rays of light upon it. And this shows that he's free, like we saw with the previous card. And also his arms are outwards. He looks quite welcoming. He's not necessarily interested in modesty of any description, and he's very, very active. And so he's naked because he's not restricted by any type of garment or any type of armour of which may slow him down or make his movements more rigid or something like that. And so he's completely and totally free to go out there, and he's in a position of leadership, he's in a position of intense creative power and intense exploration of the world. Now, if we were to look at him from the side, we can see something quite interesting, because it would look like he was sitting in Aleister Crowley's very own personal asana, or yoga pose. And so an asana means seat, and it's how we position our bodies during meditation. And it's said to be very uncomfortable at first, until gradually it becomes extremely comfortable, until the point when you can sit into your asana and completely forget your physical body and its aches and pains and things, and just go off into the space of the mind. And so that he would be sitting in an asana shows that he is concerned with the great work that we spoke of before. So he has that physical body here in the world of which we exist in now, and he's still connected with the powers of the mind, those 11 rays. And in fact, I'm going to return to those 11 rays in a moment, because he also holds in his hand here the Phoenix Wand. Now, we've seen this before, and it's a ritual wand of the Golden Dawn. And this wand can be seen used in a ceremony known as the 5x6 ceremony, which of course is 11 once again. And so that really connects back to that symbol. What is the 5x6 ceremony? Well, it's all about bringing into manifestation the powers of life via a vital heat, a fire. It's a type of fire ritual. And of course, we have the Phoenix Wand, the phoenix said to have created itself from the fire, and is thus infinitely reborn through it. And it was known in ancient Egypt as Bennu, which was a symbol of the resurrection of all of the universe, because our spiritual essence sprang forth from the physical dead world and desired to incarnate again and to carry on with the experience of life. And so that's what we see here with the Phoenix Wand. It also shows the power of the character. He's in a position of leadership. He's able to go out and perform this ritual and make it work, and so he's at quite a high level in his development there as well. Over on his left hand, we can see that he is holding the reins, of which are connected to this large lion. The left hand concerned with the physical world, and so this shows he is in complete control of where he goes in the physical world. He has free reign over where this lion takes him. We've seen a symbol like this before on the Major Arcana with the Lust card, and there's the suggestion that one would have to be very confident in where they're going to behave like this, and they would also have to have a great passion to actually get to wherever it is that they want to go. And so it's showing he has this lust for life. He has this desire to go to all of the corners of the earth and to taste of their many wonders, and he has complete freedom over which corner of the earth to go to first and how long he stays there and everything else. And so the actual reins are of course connected to a lion, of which is pulling him along on a chariot, and it looks like he's going really very, very quickly here, which obviously is that power. You can imagine the roaring of this chariot as it emblazons itself through the roads. And of course the lion is Leo. We have that strong influence of Leo coming through this card. And so if we look at the qualities of Leo, we've got that strong driving force coming through this character. And so we are looking at an energy of deep enthusiasm, of dynamic and confident exploration. He's very ambitious, and he's very powerful and charismatic. And if we look at it on the other side, though, of course, our character here could also be a bit sort of arrogant. You know, he's charging on. Perhaps he's not really caring about, what's happening behind him or even in front of him. And so he could be a little bit arrogant with that exploration and that power that he's got as well. But hopefully we can stay on more of the positive side of it, as shown in this Thoth card. Indeed, there is a particularly strange symbol on this card, of which is this patch of green underneath the chariot. It almost looks like it's not supposed to be there. It's completely out of colour coordination with the rest of the card, so much so that it looks like it was unfinished. Well, it's an odd symbol, and yet it is, as far as I'm concerned, the green earth, which is to say the fertilised earth, returning us again to the seal upon his chest. Wherever his chariot goes to, it's furrowing the earth with its wheels, and his seed, of which is springing forth, which doesn't necessarily have to be thought of in a sexual manner. It can literally be the creative seed of the intuition and of the heart. And so he furrows the earth, impregnates it with this creative seed, and what's going to happen? Grass is going to grow, and the fertile green earth is going to show, and so he's laying the groundwork for the green earth to show behind him. And so it's a really quite interesting and easily missed symbol. And so when you draw the Prince of Wands here in your Thoth Tarot reading, it's asking us to take upon the qualities of this character, and it can say that perhaps we've reached a point in our life where we may have to use this enthusiasm, we may have to find a drive to move us forward and to explore new things and better things that may lead us down new paths. And we need to get hold of his leadership and his qualities of enjoyment of life, that lust for life, engage ourselves in them and put them towards achieving our own personal goals. The Princess of Wands is a really ambitious and freedom-loving card, and in fact we can see that straight away as our princess appears to be jumping forth into this world of flame. On the Rider-Waite deck, known as the Page of Wands, we can see something far more sedate, and yet the wand is taller than the character, representing that will and desire for life and adventure. And they're also wearing a plume, or perhaps of fire, and yet also of justice, of which is a symbol we shall be returning to shortly in the Thoth card. And yet here we really can see a much more fiery symbology, and part of this is that the princess cards in the minor arcana court cards represent the earth aspect of the suit, and so the Princess of Wands is the earth part of fire, and so her body is created out of earth, and she's jumping forth into fire, of which of course would burn her body. This could imply a type of impulsiveness or a reactive nature to fire, and yet, as Crowley describes it in the Book of Thoth, could also be that she here is the fuel of fire. So the earth, the world of manifestation, is indeed what is allowing fire to dance and to grow, and in many ways to consume. And if we could look at this in a positive aspect, in that she herself also consumes the energy of it, of which is its dance, its force, and all of its many different ways of bringing light to the world, and also even of destroying things of which it comes across. It's an essential force of the universe, and so she takes all of this into her own heart and carries it with her on her adventure, and it's an adventure of high energy and beauty and the golden power of the fire. And indeed, the main flame of which she jumps into here is shaped like the letter Yod. Now we see the letter Yod time and time again in the Thoth Tarot, and not without good reason, because the letter Yod, of which is the 10th letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and so we have the 10 Sephiroth of the Tree of Life there straight away, is also the origin and the form of all of the other letters, and so one cannot write Hebrew without writing the letter Yod. And so this is rather interesting, because Yod in itself here may represent the presence of God or of creation in all of the other words or all of the other things, and so it's that spark of spirit of which is in everything from the very small to the very large. And indeed Yod itself, here represented as a flame, represents something of creation itself. If we actually wrote the letter Yod, we would begin by simply forming a dot, a singularity. We would then bring it down from this divine singularity towards the world of manifested form below, and it would begin to spread out and begin to take shape, and finally it would move outwards horizontally into the physical world through the doorway of creation into the space of reality that we see around us. And indeed we can actually see this on the Tree of Life, where the princess card is going to be in Malkuth, and so she's in Malkuth, which is kingdom. It's that manifested physical world, and we can't really go on a spiritual journey without being based in the physical world. This is something that we speak about in spiritual practices. There's a lot of neglect of Malkuth, of the world of kingdom and of form, and people associate it with the negative aspects of the ego, erroneously, it must be said, because all of the wonderful elements of the universe pass through and come together into Malkuth. So some people see it as not even part of the Tree of Life, but really it is integral to it. Without our physical form, without having this world around us, you couldn't be watching this video now even. And yet we don't want to be separated from the spiritual aspects either, or the physical aspects, and indeed that is perhaps what the true nature of original sin actually is the separation of us from our spiritual nature, our divine form. And so here she is taking her element of earth, that is her physical body and Malkuth and form, and she's instilling it with the fire of spirit, of which we know in the Kabbalah and within the Hebrew world as Nefesh, of which of course is the vital spark, the vital spirit, of which we could almost picture as a type of fire, of which of course is a strong energy, such as we see again even in the Bible, to love God with all of the energy of your being and every thought that is within you. And so our princess is turning her back on the mundane and the boring aspects of the physical world, and she's instilling her soul with that passion. She is indeed loving God, meaning the world of creation, with all of the passion of her heart. And so it looks like she's turning away from us if we're looking at the card, but really what she's doing is turning away from the world of restriction and the world of saying, well, is the question, who is going to stop me, or who is going to let me? And she's free-spirited, she is individualistic, and she's setting forth on that adventure because she likes the look of that dancing Yod flame, and so she says, why not? She is also pictured here without any clothing, and this represents her being completely unafraid of her being, of her body, of her mind. She is unafraid to express herself completely and fully, and it could also be said that she is not clothed in the things of the world, of which may represent status or may represent place in life. She doesn't want those type of garments upon her, symbols and sigils of which say, you are this and so stay in your place. She's going off to that flame, and it also shows that she is a fiery character. On the more negative aspect of it, it can represent in some way that she believes so fully in herself that maybe she doesn't quite realise that she would get burnt by that fire, so a little bit reckless, but she's also a very energetic and free-spirited soul with a great deal of enthusiasm for life. She holds onto a wand of the sun. This is a lovely symbol, and it has upon it 30 rays. And so, in one way, this could return us to the sun card upon the major arcana, and so we could see there that dance of life and that great happiness and joy that we see there. And yet also, returning to the Tree of Life and the Kabbalah, the 30 rays of the sun upon this wand could represent the 30th path, of which is known as the Path of Resh, or the Path of the Sun. And indeed, this is quite an interesting one. It connects Hod to Yesod, and so Hod is going to be splendour, and Yesod is bringing us back to that foundation that we had before. And yet this path is also said to be about collecting intelligence. And how this relates to the sun and the card is that the 12 rays of the sun that we often see on these symbols represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so these are guideposts of experience, of personality, of life itself. And if we're going into that sun, of which of course governs birth and life in the day and the waking world, and she's going to take in those incarnations, and she's going to see those, and perhaps understand a link between the personalities of which we have experienced in other incarnations, and that desire to have experience of which makes us want to be incarnated, makes us want to actually stay alive and enjoy the glory of life itself. And that's one of her big themes that we see in this actual card. Indeed, we can see upon the altar here, very small, but there are 5 roses upon the altar. These are the 5 senses of the physical world, or what we perceive as being the 5 senses, and they are fueled by the fire above them. And so this is quite a simple symbol. It really means that she is here worshipping on the altar all of the joys of physical life. And again, it's important on a spiritual journey not to neglect this, like what some gurus and people do. We have to enjoy the physical life. It's where we are actually living, and we can experience a great deal of joy. And look at all the memories that we make by wonderful experiences here in the very world, here and now. And that's what she's worshipping here on her journey. The altar itself is a beautiful deep gold, again representing the sun. And upon the columns of the altar are two ram's heads, one of which inverted, and so they are kind of facing each other there. And there's actually, it would be 12 on each row if we counted them, so there'd be 3 on each side of the 4 pillars of the altar. And so these can be Aries, yet again, because we have Aries the ram, and this has showed up in the Wands cards. And so if we look at Aries in astrology, we can also see that these ram's heads coming together here and facing each other like this represents something else, perhaps a little more mystical, because the sun enters the sign of Aries upon the spring equinox, of which of course is around the 21st of March. And here the flowers are growing towards the sun. The world is reborn. It is fertile and new, and all of the different joys of summer are coming in a fresh sky and a glorious awaiting of the experiences to follow when the sun is high in the sky. And so yet again, the joy of life itself. Now, perhaps the biggest symbol upon this card in terms of its sheer space on the actual character is the hair, or rather the crown, of which she wears, a type of headdress of which is said to be made out of ostrich plumes and represents the Egyptian crown of the goddess Mart. And so here it represents a sense of justice, and so although she's very free-spirited, she still has her own sense of balance, such as we have seen with those Tree of Life associations, although it may be her own type of justice of which she follows. And so the goddess Mart was all about divine order and balance. And in the judgment of Osiris, the hearts of the dead were weighed upon scales of which were balanced by the goddess Mart, or her feather. And of course it would be to weigh the heart against the feather. This is indeed a type of judgment and shows whether one has lived according to the balance and justice of the goddess Mart. And interestingly enough, spell number 30 from the Book of the Dead was often uttered on these rituals. This brings us again to the 30 rays on the sun on her wand, and that the gods report the weighing of the heart into a company of 12 other gods known as the Great Ennead. And so here we have the 12 signs of the zodiac as shown on the sun card yet again, meaning that this wand symbol really is one of duality and suggesting a great balance present up in this card, despite her carefree and freedom-loving attitude. Indeed, she is holding on to this tiger. I think this is a rather fabulous-looking symbol upon this card. And the tiger is quite a fearful animal, and yet it is also the aspects of the princess here as a character, and so the tiger could be strength and courage and independence. It represents our instincts, and yet also, on its more negative balance, a type of unpredictability. And so here she has this tiger coiled around her. She's holding onto its tail, and she almost appears to be dragging it with her into the actual flames. And so she's tamed the tiger. It's not attacking her, it's part of her, it's connected deeply to her, and she's bringing it along for the ride. It represents in that way her courage and her lack of fear. And so when you draw this card, it can really be talking about that confidence. It can say, be freedom loving, be non-conforming, and go out there and follow your passions. Instill your life with the energy of this character. She is daring and exciting, and she's really quite sort of energetic. And it's saying to not be afraid. So the tiger, she's not afraid of it. So we have to overcome old patterns of belief, old ways of thinking of which are keeping us here and stopping us from going on that journey. We have to bring those fears along with us, tamed, conquered, and having learnt from them, in order to continue on our spiritual journey into all of the glories of life. The Knight of Cups may appear, at first glance at least, to be slightly more simple in his symbology than what we saw with the Queen of Cups, of whom was so subtle and fluid that she was intentionally difficult to fathom. Here we can see something different. On the Rider-Waite card, for example, we can see a strong-looking king sat on a stable base in the midst of a storm. He holds these dual symbols of the cups in his hand, representing balance, and appears to be a mature and approachable king. The Knight of Cups here in the Thoth is fire in water, and fire in water is rather odd, and certainly appears to be contradictory in nature, and indeed it suggests that there is a conflict and an instability in the nature of this card, and of the character of our actual knight here. Of course, fire in water can easily go wrong. They don't necessarily mix very well. If I poured water over fire, it would put it out, and if fire was placed too close to water or near it, it may make it evaporate, or steam, or become so hot that it burns us. A balance is needed if fire and water are to be placed together in order to stop, or at least reduce, the possibility of a reaction ruining one of them. On the Tree of Life, this card as a knight or a king is to be found in Shokmar, and so it's male creative energy. And this card in particular is Shokmar in Briar, and Briar is associated with creation and wisdom and that desire to create. And so what we have here is a knight of whom is charging forth with this real power to create, and it can even be to create as in procreation, in that he wants to start a family, so to speak, and also to create, as in to build and to make in the physical world. Again, something of which requires balance. We can't procreate without the coming together of a mother and father. We can't actually build something without it having a strong foundation and a balanced foundation, like what we saw with the Rider-Waite card. And yet, this knight is very far from that world of unemotional and pure logic. In fact, he is not wearing a crown or a helmet upon his head, and strangely enough here, he is actually the only court card to not wear a hat or a helmet, or to have something behind them that could look like a hat or helmet. And so this shows that he is really welcoming and open, and he's also very trusting, because if he's charging through this environment not wearing a helmet, he would be inherently at danger for doing so. And so it shows that he is trusting us not to attack him, metaphorically speaking. And so he's saying, now come on, I'm not going into battle. I'm not this fighting type of knight. I'm above and beyond all that. And he's asking us not to fight as well. So he's saying, lay down your sword. Let's be the better person for not battling, for example. And yet also it can simply show that perhaps on his journey he's clearly in a state of quite fast movement on this card. And so he's on the move, he's out to explore the world. He's certainly not going to be in a place long enough to become a political enemy of somebody, for example, or to forge alliances with anything that would end up in him being sent to battle. He is above and beyond all that, and if it did come to him being sent into battle, it'd be on his horse and away. He is, however, wearing a suit of armour of which we can see, and there is a green colour to this, a tinge of green coming out all throughout it. And these are the elements of the natural world of which we see all around us, elements that he carries within himself as part of his being. These elements specifically are the growth of the green earth, and its eternal renewal, and so that eternal journey of which he is on. And so of course we see this in the world all around us. Beautiful flowers and grasses and trees spring into life in spring. They gradually die away and then come back again the next year. And so it's showing that there is, in his personality and in the things of which he symbolises to the person of whom draws the card, a desire for growth, a desire for renewal and of new experience. He doesn't want to become stagnant, and that's why he pushes on with this journey, and also why he has these wonderful wings. Now the wings are a multifaceted symbol of which we will return to, and in their most simple form they are the active part of water. And so it's water surging on. It's like waves in the card, the strong surging seas, of which forever changes and forever refreshes and renews. And he also rides upon this white horse, a beautiful and strong animal of which carries him on, and in its most simple form, again, the white is purity, and so it shows that his vision and his determining force through this journey is really pure. So it really isn't battle and conquest and all that type of thing. It's rather love and compassion and intuition, which rises above those lower forms, and this is a symbol we will again return to as we go on. Taken as a whole, the horse and the winged knight almost look like Pegasus. Now, the horse itself hasn't got any wings, but rather the symbol as an entire card, and this can show the element of balance of which is required in order for this knight to become who he is, and in order to keep that fiery element of water stable. Pegasus, of course, rides both on heaven and earth. It could gallop amongst the rocks of the earth and fly amongst the clouds of the sky, and so it's a coming together, and as above so below, as we saw with the previous card, and so it's showing that there is an inherent balance required in order to rise above these lower forms, for instance, and that type of thing. And also it shows that what carries him onwards through his journey is balanced. It's diplomatic. He's not going to get into conflict, and so he doesn't need his helmet, because he already knows that he's not going to go down those routes. And we can see that in him holding out the cup in front of him, and so this comes first and foremost, this grail-like cup. And of course the cup is a deeply feminine symbol. It's that womb of creation that we've seen before, the fertile symbol. And so that in itself actually creates balance to him, and balances his entire consciousness. And more importantly here, we can see that within the cup is actually the crab. And so this is the symbol astrologically of Cancer, which shows sensitivity and compassion, and also the love of the home, the creation of the home, such as the shell of the crab. And so this is why this card is often described as being somebody whom would be like a good father, for example, or somebody of whom would want to build a home. Going slightly more deeper into it, the cup, as the symbol of the divine female, is of course the moon. And so it's the moon in Cancer, astrologically. And this shows an even deeper sense of fulfillment with our loved ones, and being surrounded with our loved ones and caring for them and them caring for us. And also of the regenerative quality of water. So just as the wings show those surging waves and the regeneration of water, we see it here as well. Crustaceans in general regenerate their shells, they shed their shells almost like a snake, and they do this in order to grow. They lose that hard outer layer to grow. It's called molting. And so just as a crab loses the shell on its back and would become vulnerable, of course, in that state, and yet would also grow, it again shows him without his helmet on and in a state of growth and of coming together into a compassion and rising above the lower emotions. We see this most strongly with the symbol at the bottom of the card here, that being the peacock. Now, this can first and foremost show something else of a conflict, like we saw with the fire and water. The peacock means different things to different cultures. It is historically unlucky and even feared in the West, whereas concerned with perception, wisdom, and the inner self in the East. We see peacock gods such as Mayura, of which is the Sanskrit word for peacock and is a sacred bird in Hindu mythology. And interestingly here, this deity kills a snake, of which is symbolic of Ouroboros and the cycling of time, and it therefore shows the overcoming of time, and with it the overcoming of the ego, and again the lower forms of vibration such as we've been seeing through this card. In strictly Western terms, however, this peacock symbol represents vanity, and we've seen this in art throughout times where the peacock shows pride and vanity in a more sinful nature, for example, and that sort of thing. And so this is simply because the peacock struts and shows its feathers and its colours to try to attract a mate, and therefore can represent the folly of certain types of behaviour. And certainly with this knight representing the dual nature as seen with the divine feminine here, and the fact that he is a male character, it's showing ego, it's showing vanity within the sphere of masculinity within that regard. And so what's happening here is that the knight is leaping or jumping over the peacock. And even more than that, it could be said that his wings are actually lifting him literally above it. He's flying above it. And so what this shows is that he has ascended from vanity and ego, just as we saw with the Hindu deity killing the snake. His journey brings him to a spiritual love and a sensitivity and a balance, and he knows that if he doesn't have this balance, then fire and water, things are going to be snuffed out, or they're going to become too hot. And so he needs that balance. He doesn't want a war going on in his own mind or anywhere else, and so he knows that he has to leap above that type of behaviour, because it's only going to create the madness of melancholy, as Crowley describes it in the Book of Thoth. And so to draw this card asks us to look at this knight as one of maturity. He is a very mature character, and he shows a compassion and a nature of which would be very calm in order to stop a conflict from occurring. And so maybe there's a conflict in our lives, and we could stop it from boiling over, so to speak, by keeping those elements in check. And it shows that we have the qualities of all of the wonders in the world within ourselves. We have the god and the goddess within ourselves, and by putting them together we can metaphorically jump over the peacock on our horse. And so what it's saying is, through balance with compassion and understanding, we can be capable of very high levels of spiritual development. And we will feel that and know it in our intuition when we have, so to speak, got our wings, because we will feel that we are able to rise above the things of which may have been keeping us in a particular state, and now we are free from them. And this new freedom will show in our consciousness, in ourselves, and the people around us, our loved ones, will thank us for it, because they too will see that change, allowing us to love and to grow together. The Queen of Cups is a really beautiful card, and she speaks about great passion and love, and yet there is also a subtlety and the suggestion of a mystery to her. And over on the Rider-Waite card we can actually see this rather well. She peers lovingly and longingly at this golden cup representing all of the wonders of creation, and even these mermaid cherub looking characters on the top of her throne seem to be looking at it. And then underneath the throne is this suggestion of something of a hidden mystery. Now the fact that she's looking at this cup, and here on the Thoth card is veiled, suggests that there is something to do with the element of the observer going on here, and therefore the nature of consciousness. Now Crowley actually describes this card in the Book of Thoth as a purity and beauty with infinite subtlety. To see the truth of her is hardly possible, for she reflects the nature of the observer in great perfection. And so, as she looks at the universe looks at her, and perhaps this is actually hinting at something of a great secret of the universe itself. And even in contemporary science we see strange experiments like the double slit, suggesting that reality itself perhaps is in some way dependent upon, or change is due to simply being observed in consciousness. And that perhaps, as things continue to expand and the universe itself expands, it becomes aware of itself and becomes conscious of its own nature, and we are individual strands of consciousness connected to a great whole, a mother ocean. And that's indeed what we see here. She is astrologically water in water. She is extremely watery, fluid and subtle. She is a mother ocean. We see this also on the Tree of Life. She's in Binah, and this is associated with the manifestation of matter, or the birthing of matter, of course. And if we look at the Tree of Life, Binah is female creative power, and Shokmar is male creative power. And so Binah is a womb of creation which receives into it this force of Shokmar, and life begins. And as a mother ocean, again, it's not as esoteric and as out there as what it may first appear. Even some scientists believe that life may have begun in the deep oceans, that it truly was, literally, a mother ocean. And then, as we've just been seeing, things expand, and life expands and wants to crawl up onto the shores and leave that womb of creation and explore all of the marvels of creation, expanding and growing forever in consciousness. The sea is of course also ruled by the moon, and the tides change based upon the faces of the moon and all of the powers connected with it. And we see this on the card, this really big, beautiful moon rising above and also behind the queen. She's sitting in front of the moon. This is intuition. It is femininity, and is therefore also concerned with the cycles both of nature and the seasons, and the cycles in one's own body, and a linking up there between them, and therefore again a coming into union and an understanding of one and the other, which is as above so below. When we understand oneself, we understand the universe. To understand the universe helps us to understand ourselves. The curves of light of which are coming down are a veil. As we've seen, it suggests that we can't see her fully, as Crowley said in the Book of Thoth. There will always be a secrecy to her, and an element of which we may never quite understand. The light on the Tree of Life could be a sod, of which again would be ruled here by the moon. And so we really see that power of the moon and the phases of the moon affecting the way of which we see things. And perhaps sometimes we can see a little bit more through the veil, so make out a little bit more of her, and other times we won't be able to see her at all. Now, in her left hand, and the left hand, of course, as we've seen, is suggestive of the physical world and the left brain and logic and all that type of thing, and yet here she holds in her left hand a shell being a symbol of that mother ocean, and also a vessel that can hold water. And as we have seen in different symbols such as the Ankh, which means life, of course, it holds water inside it, the waters of life, and comes down through that birth canal. It's a symbol of fertility and of childbearing and life itself. Because she is associated with Binah and is that mother ocean, this symbol could represent that, and it could also be that, of course, she is creative power. She holds that water of life, that womb of life, in her left hand, and so her physical manifestation is the giving and nurturing of life itself. And so she really is a mother figure in that result. And in the shell, we can actually see the fish. And it's in a bit of a funny position this time, is this fish. It's standing on end, with its tail fins displayed into this pattern of a trident. And of course the trident is going to be a symbol of the god of the seas, Neptune. And this god is a great one of inspiration and intuition, like what we've just seen with the moon there, and also has an element of illusion connected with him. The trident itself. The trident historically is a fishing implement. It enables one to reach forth into the water and hope to catch a fish. And so symbolically, it's an extension of one's consciousness, enabling us to reach forth into that mother ocean and connect with the bounties thereof. It's also quite simply a trinity, and so it has a past, a present and a future, as does everything in the world. It's a maiden, mother and crone, a night, a day and a twilight, a liminal space in the middle, of which is a middle pillar, of which is neither one thing or the other, and is that space where the as above and the so below come together. Now the ocean spreads out in front of the Queen. It looks like we could almost become one with that ocean ourselves when we're looking at the card as the observer, and it contains within it a beautiful reflection of what we see on the shore, so a reflection of the Queen and of the actual veil. And so she transmits her image into the world and also receives the reflection from the world, of which may in itself be related to that mystery of consciousness, and also shows that she is a channel for empathy and intuition. She can take in all these reflections, see the ripples upon them, understand them, and yet also view them perhaps as separate from herself and yet containing a reflection of herself, so part of her being. It really represents that feminine creative power, emotion, imagination, perception. And it can also represent perhaps a shadow side, a hidden world underneath the water, as we've seen before, that we can't see, because when we look into it we actually just see ourselves staring back, or the ripples of the water obscure the depth of it and what may lay beyond. Of course, it's not a stormy ocean or anything like that. It's very calm, it looks quite warm, it looks very inviting, the sea upon this, and so she herself is calm and inviting. She's certainly not aggressive in any way. She's not a judging queen of whom will scream off with your head and that type of thing. You know, she understands us, she understands what's in our heart, and also something of the mystery of our actual being. And we can see that in that she holds in her hand once again the lotus, and here it has 9 petals upon it. This brings us to the 9th Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, Yesod. This is the foundation upon which the world has been built, of which the world has been created upon. And it also balances the forces and the opposing forces of the pillars upon the Tree of Life. And so we can see them joining here into Yesod, and so we have Hord and Netzach and all this type of thing. And so it's like a womb of creation. It's like a space before life is born into Malkuth below it. And so she understands that in the physical world. She sees us as a extension of spirit. She knows where we've come from and where we're going and all that. And we see 2 lotuses actually floating on the ocean to expand upon this theme. These are Gemini in astrological terms, the twins, and so they represent the ability to communicate these things onto us. And they're also a duality in themselves, and so they go back to that as above and so below type of thing, or birth and death, and of course the many reflections of life in between. And so when she looks at us, she sees herself reflected in us, and she's able therefore to communicate very well what we're thinking and feeling, because she can think it and feel it herself just as well and take it upon into her own heart. We see this with the other symbol upon this card, the ibis bird. This is a wonderful symbol with this card because it is first and foremost a symbol of Thoth, of whom is of course the actual namesake of the deck as a whole. But Thoth is associated with the moon. He's a moon god, and also of sacred texts and the mysteries there upon them. His name is he of whom is like the ibis, and therefore he is depicted as the ibis. And he is a recorder of the things that happen in the universe in a book, much like the Akashic records and the idea that things are some way present around us, that things survive and memories of them live. But because he is associated with that type of scientific, physical wisdom, he's going to be connected with Hod, the intellect and the physical world. And yet she here seems to be almost petting him. You know, she's laying her hand on top of this Thoth ibis, and so she's in control of what he is and what he represents. And so she therefore could control what is written in that book. And she's also not regarding the intellectual written record as the be-all and end-all of expression. She is more interested in channeling that through her intuition. The intuition is on top of this bird. So she is saying that what is written basically comes from that love, comes from that Mother Ocean. That Mother Ocean is in control of the intellect, or at least it should be, as we understand our journey through the universe and through the tarot cards. And so picking up the card shows that we are intuitive and that we should connect with our intuition. We can get on and relate to people. We understand them not just as that one person, but as a divine consciousness experiencing the universe from its own perspective. Drawing the card can show a need to get in touch with that type of thing, to know our inner feelings. And when we know them, then we can express them and understand them and work with them. And so it's asking us to develop that intuition and to really begin to love our intuition and trust it. For when we do, we will be in great control of all around us, and we will be able to use the compassion and the love and the understanding to take control over what is written in that book, of which is the record of our life and the physical things around us, of which will take shape due to our channeling and our reflecting of them out into the actual world and the things we see. The Prince of Cups appears to be riding towards the observer on his chariot through this lake, buffeted by rain and strong weather. On the Rider-Waite card we can see something really different, the more peaceful and calm nature of the card. He's not racing through the environment, but rather he is peacefully trotting on his horse through this environment and holding the cup out in front, showing it to the world around him, showing a charm and a creativity, and sharing it and wishing to offer it to us. The Prince of Cups on the Thoth Tarot is very different. This shows an intensity, and indeed he is the airy part of water, so he is air in water. And of course air and water, when they mix together, can create waves and can create blasts of storms and so on, and quite extreme and amazing weather conditions. And so it's showing that the stream would flow very quickly, for example, with this card, and he would ride with it and want to explore life and all of those tactile sensations that you would get through air and water along the way. On the Tree of Life, as a prince, he's going to be found in the 6th Sephiroth, which is Tifereth. And this is interesting because it shows that charm of which this card is said to have, because Tifereth is associated with beauty. And so he is really quite chivalrous. He's the type of prince that would come and sweep us off our feet, that type of thing. And yet, because he is in Tifereth, it's Kether, but it's on a lower vibration upon the Tree of Life, and so it's really like not so much a child, but a young person who is coming down from that white light of everything at the top and wanting to explore it out into the physical world. So it's like a young person on an adventure, on a quest, and wanting to taste and touch and experience everything all around him. Astrologically, he's in Scorpio, and so we can really see those elements there of his personality coming through as well, that intensity of his emotions and that great magnetism and power of persuasion and intuition, really putting himself out into the world. And yet Scorpio also has that transformative element. It's connected with cycles of death and rebirth, and it has multiple different symbols associated with it, many of which we've seen over on the Major Arcana with the Death card. And here we can see the second symbol of Scorpio that's actually pulling his chariot along, and that of course is the eagle. So this is the second stage of Scorpio, and it's a type of transformative stage connected with courage, power. As you can see, this eagle is flying very freely. It's very powerful, and so there's going to be a lot of air associated with it. There's actually quite a lot of air in this card, despite it being a water card. And so the eagle is strong, although it is controlled by our prince, which we will come back to. And yet, of course, as an eagle, it's prone to swooping down upon its prey and defeating it, so it can cause destruction. And yet it can also be very powerful with its intellect and its intuition. It will be self-focused, and so this is pulling the actual prince along on his chariot. The chariot is shaped like a seashell, and it's said to be not actually touching the water. It's supposed to be almost floating above it, like a hovercraft, really, in many regards. And so he's just scooting along the actual surface of the water without breaking it. And this is showing that although he is going out on this adventure, he's not delving too deep into his emotions at this stage, to the fact where if he went under the water, it would bog him down, it would slow him down, and he doesn't want that, he doesn't want to be held back. And so it's suggesting that he's not really caring too much, just like the eagle wouldn't really be too bothered about the opinions of its prey when it swooped down to get them, for example. And yet it can also suggest that there is a depth to him, a depth that we simply don't see because we've got no idea what lies underneath the water, because of course he's not breaking the surface of it. And he doesn't really want us to see that because he just wants to move on. He wants to explore and move away. And so that secretive nature of him, he's not allowing us to see it. We don't know what depths he holds in his heart. And he holds the reins of his chariot in his left hand, of which of course is associated with the physical world, the left brain, that sort of thing. And so if he's controlling that with his left hand, it's showing that he's focused on his intellect rather than his emotions. And also the reins themselves are black. This is the physical world as well, and specifically with Scorpio, it's the decay aspect of Scorpio and the death card. So it really brings us back to that transformative idea that Scorpio can be destructive here. And perhaps also it's showing that his journey that he's controlling with this rein in his left hand, being in the physical world, will end in death. No matter how fast he goes or to how many places he goes, there will be an end to this journey in the physical world, with his destruction and his decay. And yet if we delve deeper into the Scorpio symbols and cross-reference it back to the death card, there is of course the rebirth and transformation element, which comes from that as well. We can see this symbol continued with his right hand, in that the lotus blossom, which is a symbol of water and the power and transformative element as well of water, is held upside down. And so it's just what we've seen with the lake and floating above it, in that he's not interested in engaging his emotions and sharing out love and emotion like what we saw with the Princess of Cups, for instance. Instead, he holds the physical intellect, the passion and power of physical exploration as more important than his intuition and his emotion and his heart. And so he's holding it down as if to say, I don't want to share that. I don't really want to have to engage in that. He does, however, hold the cup as well in his left hand. So that shows what's most important to him there. And within the cup is a coiling serpent. And this serpent is one of the other symbols of Scorpio. And it's a really interesting one in that the prince is looking at this serpent, so he obviously finds it very important. And this is Scorpio learning to become manipulative, to put on the charm. So it's like the serpent, of course, in Eden, asking to taste of a fruit to give knowledge, and it's quite manipulative, and you don't quite know if you can trust it. And so it could be suggesting that he has a little bit of that personality in him. And yet, of course, a serpent sheds its skin. It shows a love of change, a changing of one's skin, which of course is a changing of one's clothes, a changing of one's appearance, and of their environment, going out on that adventure, going out on that never-ending quest. It's versatile, just like our prince himself. Now, the wings of the eagle and these quite strong-looking waves behind him both contain the number 8. They're formed out of 8 different images here. And this brings us to the 8th Sephiroth, Hod, of which is yet again concerned with the intellect and the physical. As well as that, it's concerned with majesty and splendour, which of course translates very easily to the fact that he is a prince and he's very charming. And Hod as well could be about using words or language. It's referred to as the key to the mystery of form. And so it's using our way of expression to conquer our obstacles. And so this prince really is going to be laying on the charm. If you met this prince, you would really come away thinking he was quite wonderful in that regard, because he's putting out that element and showing all of his successes and things like that in the world, which can be quite good. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and so to draw the card, it could ask us to express that in some way, a passion, an intensity that makes people think that we are, quite wonderful. We've had all these experiences and adventures, and to show our abilities out into the world, show what we can do. And yet, of course, he's quite self-centered in that respect as well, so his main responsibility is his own adventure, because he's holding that lotus upside down. So perhaps, even though he really is quite charming, he might not be entirely trustworthy in some regard. You might not want to actually rely on him. And so although he can be quite creative in his way of controlling the eagle, for example, and going on these quests, he's not showing you his true destination. He keeps it secret. And so to get the card could be asking us, are we going with that flow of life, or are we being secretive and holding it back? We need to come to our highest good upon our journey, not turn too much towards ourselves, but know ourselves better, be balanced in our adventure, so that we're not just too far to one side, and then we will be able to actually travel throughout all the different cards and come out better because of it. The Princess of Cups is a lovely card. She's concerned with emotion and intuition, and she brings that forth into the universe and asks us to share it and take it into ourselves with all of the other souls of whom we meet upon our journey through creation. On the Rider-Waite card, we can see our Page of Cups is adorned in this floral costume representing the physical world, and she's very watery here, and offers us a chalice with this fish appearing from the top, which is Pisces, and is all of the things associated with creativity and intuition and feminine creative power. And she's asking us to take the elements of that into ourselves, to allow that flow of power and of emotion to become a central and integral part of our actual experience. The Princess of Cups is very watery, so she's concerned actually with the earth element of water, so the earthy part of water. And earth and water are said to be rather friendly to each other. They are passive, and so there's no contradiction in her personality, in her being. They flow in and out of each other and support each other, earth and water, very well, and so she's a very harmonious card in that regard. And on the Tree of Life, being a princess, she's on Malkuth, the 10th Sephiroth, that world of kingdom, of the physical world, and yet she's also concerned with the world of Isaiah, the world of making, or the world of becoming. And so a princess in general could live her entire life out in a world of becoming. A princess is to become a queen, and so everything in her physical world, in that world of the kingdom of where she lives, is created to bring her up with the possibility and the expectation of her blossoming into a queen and of the things to come. And so really it's saying that with our physical world around us, that's our base to become what we are going to become queens and kings and whatever else in our own micro world. And in order to do that, we have to take in those emotions, we have to understand them and process them and allow them to change us and to become that of which we will. Above her head is this large swan, of which could also be a type of headdress shaped like a swan. And this brings us to that becoming of the universe, because this is concerned with Eastern creation myths, specifically things such as the Hamsa Upanishad, and so in Indian tradition this could represent the migration of a swan, although some say it could be a goose. And yet it's a metaphor and a symbol, an observation really, of the migration of the soul and the reincarnation of the soul through different lifetimes and different experiences until all has been experienced. And so it's known in Hindu and in Eastern mythology as a Paramahansa, of which is the individual soul seeking the highest soul. And so it's the same thing as what we have today in more contemporary beliefs of the universe itself expanding, the universe becoming conscious of itself, a migration of souls outwards to explore the unexplored reaches of experience. And in this regard, with the Princess of Cups, to instill them, of course, with emotion, and to feel all of the wonderful things, and even the not so wonderful things that there are to feel and to experience along the way. This swan headdress could also be concerned with that primordial sound of creation, the Om, the symbol of peace, of creation, and of an eternal presence throughout everything in the universe. She holds up in her hands the cup, the large shell-like cup, of course, plucked from the depths of the ocean itself, and up in it is this turtle image inside the actual cup. And so this is bringing us to a Hindu philosophy yet again. And here we may see Kurma, or one of the 10 incarnations of the god Vishnu. And here he's associated with the churning of the ocean of milk, of which is a type of creation myth concerned with an elixir of immortality. And so that's what our princess is offering us here, an elixir of immortality. Just like we saw with the Page of Cups offering us that fish, that elixir of immortality is actually emotion and love, and that flowing in and out of creative inspiration and things such as that. And we also see the tortoise or the turtle supporting the elephant in Hindu creation myth, and of course the earth is upon their back. And so it's showing there a type of stability, a type of conduit for the earth to move upon. So the earth here can't move without that emotion that we're taking into ourselves, that creativity that allows it to move, that allows it to expand, like what we've just seen before. It could also, astrologically, be the symbol of Cancer, and so it's a maternal instinct, a feminine creative power, of which flows throughout this entire card, of which we can see with the fish showing up again. This time it's this large fish said to be a dolphin, and this symbolises that power, that feminine creative power, the flowing of maternal instinct of the creation of life, of the moon, and of the flowing of emotion and of creativity, art, things such as that. It's also associated with intuition and of sensitivity, and so that just a sense of knowing in the heart rather than in the head. And it links us to the Queen of Cups, of which is the mother character of this princess, and it so it really brings in that royal house, if you like, the female goddess, that power of which brings creativity and life into the world itself. And it's that power really which permeates everything in existence and actually makes us want to experience things in the first place. It's the power of love, and so we can see emanating from the back of the swan 10 ripples or rays of light or emanations, and the 10 are the 10 Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, and so together they represent everything in existence, and yet also together they represent the 10th Sephiroth Malkuth, which is the suggestion of this card of bringing that into the physical world and seeing it all around us. Because they come from the back of the swan could also represent love in itself here. It could have an element of, for example, the goddess Aphrodite or Artemis travelling in a swan-drawn chariot throughout the heavens, and in Celtic mythology could be the goddess Brigid or Saint Brede, who is concerned with swans and also of ewes and sheep, celebrated on Imbolc when they become pregnant and bring life back into the world at the same time that spring comes back into the world and breathes colour and light and love back into us like that. On her dress, which is again quite shell shaped, it's certainly flowing throughout this ocean. We can see these shapes, of which are hexagonal and also crystalline, and as we've seen before, the crystal can be the manifestation of the physical world. It's the building blocks of the things around us that we actually see. And yet, because it has 6 sides, it's hexagonal, it can bring us back to the middle pillar and that link with the middle pillar on the Tree of Life, which is where we see Tifereth, and therefore may it represent her relationship with the Prince of Cups, of whom is associated with that Sephiroth. In her left hand she holds the lotus, and here it's upwards, it's upright, and so the light would flow down into it. And so that's quite a simple symbol. That simply means that she is open to receive love. And if she's open to receive love, she's also open to give it and to share it. And so it's suggesting that she really is open to emotion. She would feel emotion very strongly and very positively and truly in her heart. And it's only through feeling it like that it can be put forth into the world. And so this green colour that we can actually see with the swan and also with the cup is the physical world. It's the green earth, the beauty of that coming spring, that coming summer. And so it's showing a real wonder and beauty in Malkuth, all the colours of the kingdom of manifestation and the world, and that we should perhaps look around the world ourselves, when we draw this card, and experience the gentleness, the sweetness, the love of life, to feel the depth of things around us, like that depth of the ocean of which she is submerged in here. And yet, of course, we have to remain grounded within it. You'll notice that her eyes are closed upon this card, as if she is drifting in this ocean, completely lost and oblivious almost to the world around her. So it can show that we can become a bit of a dreamer if we go too far into this, and so we have to keep ourselves grounded and engage in that green earth. Not just stop and smell the flowers, so to speak, but take their actual physical attribute into our life. And we can't stop to smell the flowers, for example, if we haven't actually walked through the meadow to get to them in the first place. And so we can't just be a dreamer. We have to actually put the energy out into the physical world there and share it with all of the beauties and wonders of which we will uncover. The Knight of Swords may be seen as a card with quite a straightforward meaning in one sense, and yet a hidden esoteric heart underneath it. The Rider-Waite card shows this as well. The king wants to strive for a clarity of mind and an intellectual understanding of the world, and yet his throne is bedecked with these images of butterflies, showing that his journey will end in a metamorphosis, and also these opposing crescent moons, showing that although he wants to rise up above that world of emotion and intuition, it's going to form something of the foundation here, the foundation of the throne he sits on, in quite simple symbolic terms. The knight here on the Thoth deck appears to be moving very, very quickly upon his journey, and indeed elementally he is fire of air, and so that's quite an interesting symbol, and this will be central to actually understanding this card. The fire in air, not necessarily referring to physical fire, but the fire of the heart, the putting in of a passion into something. And so in terms of actual physical air, it could be quite a violent storm, such as a hurricane or a twister. It would move very quickly, could certainly clear an area, but would cause a lot of destruction in its wake, and could also be prone to changing direction just as quickly as what it is moving in. However, we do see in a lot of literature this idea of having a burning passion, which then enables us to move forward quickly and enables us to see things with more clarity. Most famously, we see this as a secret in the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Straight away, as soon as the book opens, he talks about you need this burning passion to manifest your desire. And so in more spiritual terms, we see people who say these prayers by reading them off cards, and they just repeat the words, but they don't actually even think about what they mean, and they don't passionately feel them or really even care whether anything happens or not. It's just a ritual. That's not going to actually achieve any results. Basically, nothing's going to happen if you just don't inject that burning passion into it. You have to get up off your chair and actually go out and take action in the physical world and move in the direction of where you want to go. And we can see that our knight is moving in a particular direction here, which is quite important, and we'll come back to that shortly. On the Tree of Life, as a knight or king, he's in Shokmar, which of course is that potent male spiritual force, as opposed to Benar, which we saw over on the Queen. Interestingly here, however, some systems link Neptune to the Sephiroth of Shokmar, and so we can see, perhaps looking back on the Rider-Waite card, those crescent moons representing that need for duality in order to actually make anything happen. So Neptune is going to have the elements, for example, of intuition coming across on there, and so Shokmar and Neptune put together would be wisdom in Shokmar and understanding in Neptune or Benar. And so there our duality comes in. The male passion or sexual creative energy travels across this Tree of Life with the capability, at least, of impregnating Benar, the womb of creation. And of course, if that was going to happen, there would actually be millions of this male creative force, sperm, racing towards the egg in terms of pure symbology, of course, and only one of them is going to actually get there. And so we can see this on the card, believe it or not. The knight is racing forwards here, and he's going in this direction, and he's not bothered about what else is going on around him. He wants to be the first to meet this goal, whatever it is in terms of its symbol. He wants to essentially win that race. And we can see on his crown the wings here, and these are really quite interesting. It's very difficult to see this, but there are actually cardinal compass points upon each of the strands of this crown, and so we can actually see north, east, south and west upon his crown. And this is coming from the top, of course, of his head, in his crown chakra area, his Sahasrara, and this shows that his mind, his free will, can determine which direction he travels up in. And so it's showing, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, because he makes a conscious decision on where his will is going to take him, and then he goes for it, and he doesn't stop until it's manifested. He's actually travelling, if we look at these cardinal points, in the direction of southeast. This is interesting and very esoteric. However, when we understand what this means, it actually describes the entirety of this card. This refers to one of the most popular and easily learned ceremonial magical works, the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, of which is often performed both before and after a magical working. It banishes any impurities from the magic circle of the ritual space and from the magician themselves. And the Lesser Banishing Ritual itself begins with a small ritual known as the Kabbalistic Cross, of where the 4 elements are invoked with divine names, and later on the names of archangels and divine names are vibrated or invoked into the 4 cardinal points. Now here we see something of interest to the card. He is, of course, fire and air in terms of his elemental symbology. And in this Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, one begins in the east and chants the Tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He, and that represents the air. They then turn to the south and vibrate the name of Adonai, of which represents fire. And so with him travelling southeast, it represents both the fire and the air, of which this card actually symbolises. And more than this, we can see that he also pushes his swords forward into this southeast direction, and his arms are outstretched and his body is leaning forward upon this horse, so he really is moving very quickly in that direction. This also refers to the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, in that when these divine names are vibrated or invoked into these compass points, one does so by performing the sign of the Enterer, or the sign of Horus. And the point of doing this is to literally impregnate that astral plane, and it's a real rush forward of energy. You're projecting outwards this vibration of a divine name into that astral plane, basically the vibrations and frequencies around you. This sign of the Enterer rushing forward like that symbolises a powerful and active energy, and of course a powerful and active energy is exactly what we see here upon the Knight of Swords, and so that really does represent almost the entirety of the card in one symbol, which is rather quite wonderful. He does, however, carry two swords, and they're quite different from each other. They may, in more astrological terms, represent Gemini, of which we see with a connection all through these swords cards, and yet they can also be something of that duality of fire and air. Yet again, the long sword actually has upon it the symbol of air on its hilt, and the smaller sword, or the dagger, bears upon it the symbol of the sun, which of course is fire. And so he's putting both of these swords outwards into the astral plane. He's injecting his burning passion into it, and so they represent together this penetrating force of which cuts through illusion, and in terms of the lesser banishing ritual, gets rid of what they call little nasties or impurities within the atmosphere. And so he's like cutting through all of the things that would have held him back, and he's seeing things clear. He's cleansed his entire environment and himself, and saying, right, there's nothing going to stop me now. Everything's clear, everything's ready for me to invoke, in terms of ceremonial magic as a symbol, invoke or manifest my goal, and nothing can stop me. And we also see on the card these swallows, these little birds here, which are flying with him in the same direction. These are Mercury, of which rules Gemini, if we're looking at it with the astrological terms, and yet perhaps more spiritually they can represent a coming abundance, and we'll come back to that in a second, as they can also simply represent our ability and our capacity to rise up and to see things with that new perspective and to cut through things. And yet, of course, this whole card is flying over the ocean underneath, which is the emotion, and so they're showing that they're still going to be guided in some way by an unseen vibration of emotion, of which we saw even on the Rider-Waite version of the card with those symbols on the throne. This is true will, and so although his will, his intention, as shown by those compass points on his crown, lets him decide with his own free choice which way he goes, he will always feel a pulling towards a particular goal, a particular way of being, of which is his true will. And so this is the love, of which is under the will. So do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. So it's basically a representation of the law of Thelema. And yet, of course, these swallows can also represent that coming abundance. And we're about to move, of course, into the next suit of cards. And this is going to be discs. And so it's going to show a manifestation of abundance. And so the swallow is a bit of a good luck symbol here. It's showing that although this knight is prone to moving in all sorts of different directions and changing with his moods, he's going here in the right direction. It could even be his true will, of which is driving him onwards, because abundance will follow. And so to get the card shows you're going to want to break free of restrictions and of stagnation, of which is holding you back. Essentially banish it. Inject into your world divine names, which could be simply things that you love, things that you want to buy or go or experience. Be decisive with them. So say, yes, I do want to have them. Put together that plan. Make it sharp. Make everything around you in your world point towards it. And then go for it. And don't stop until you see it manifested. The Queen of Swords is a mature and intelligent mother character, of whom we can really imagine doling out advice to her daughter, the Princess of Swords. The Rider-Waite version of this card shows a more traditional looking queen, although interestingly enough her sword is pointed upwards, which is the opposite to what we see here on the Thoth cards. However, she does have upon her throne here a symbol of a cherub, of which is a recurring symbol that we will come back to shortly. First and foremost, she is a mother character, and you can imagine her advice to the princess strengthening her will and resolve. This is because this queen, as the queens are the watery aspect, and so she's the airy part of water. That's quite interesting because they can strengthen each other. If air blew across the sea, it would create stronger waves, and if water became mixed with the air coming down to our world, we might get rain, for example, or hail, or something like that. And so they're neutral to each other, and yet they can actually strengthen each other when the conditions are correct. That idea of her as a mother, of course, is going to be central to this entire card, and so clearly on the Tree of Life, as a queen, she's centred in Benar, and this is the great mother, the womb of creation, which receives that masculine force of Shokmar and turns it into form and creates it into form. However, Benar is importantly here ruled by Saturn, and of course Saturn talks about time and death and the impermanence of the physical world of which is given birth to, and so we do see that on this card, that she gives birth to form and creation, and yet she's not above destroying it and taking it away as well if it no longer serves a purpose. She is, however, a very strong card. You can see that her upper body is depicted as naked and the lower body is clothed. This shows her vulnerability, and also that she's not afraid to show that vulnerability. So she's not wearing any type of armour or a regal dress or anything. She's actually just showing her physical self, her physical frame, for what it is. She knows who she is, and she can also see that in everybody else around her, so she's not hiding anything. She's just saying, this is who I am, and showing myself in this way makes me vulnerable, but I accept that, and I'm not afraid to show the reality of myself to the world. The lower half of her, of course, is clothed. She's wearing this quite graceful looking sarong or skirt, and this is quite a flowing garment, as they are in reality, and so this shows that she basically can go with the flow of the world around her. Crowley describes this in the Book of Thoth as her having graceful movements, and her ability in dancing and balancing would be exceptional, and so it's quite a wonderful image that we can depict her perhaps dancing, and this skirt waving around to the movements of her body and the movements of the music, showing that she goes with the flow of the world and the rhythm of all of life of which goes on around her. She doesn't get stuck on one particular note, but goes through with the entirety of things and just lets them flow, which is what, of course, we should all be aiming for in some regards, and what the Swords cards have been perhaps building up to. There's all this conflict which can hold one back, and here we see finally one of whom is able to go with the flow. She is, however, a very analytical and physical world focused queen, and so we see here in a vast difference to the Rider-Waite card. Her sword is pointed downwards towards Malkuth, or towards the physical world that we are born into and live our physical lives within. And this represents her analytical mind, and it shows that she, as she goes with that flow, lives in the moment. She lives in all of the physical world and the changing seasons and the changing cultures and fashions that come and go, and she sees all these things coming into this world around her, and she sees them with logic and with an intelligence. She sees them for what they truly are, And for that reason, this sword represents her as a queen of great clarity. She's not clouded by too much sentimentality or a particular creed or school of which makes her see things in a certain way. She's completely impartial here, and so she sees things unclouded by a social or political or cultural lens. She just sees them for what they are, and so she can be very intellectual in that regard. And this is why she holds in her left hand, of which is that hand of course connected with the left hemisphere and that intellectual and analytical way of thought, a severed head, of which it can also be seen as a mask as well, if we don't want to look at it particularly gruesomely. And this head looks like that of an old man, and therefore could represent old ways of being, old ways of thought. And it's interesting here to have a look yet again at the lust card on the major arcana, of where the beast actually tramples upon what's said to be the old saints underneath. And so what that is, of course, is he's destroying the old order and the old way of thought in order to, in Thelemic terms, create the new aeon, essentially the coming of a new age, a new way of thinking. And so she does that here with this severed head in her own little way, and the head is old ideas, old ways of thinking of which we have moved on past. It could be habits, even addictions. It could be something as simple as something that we've owned that had a purpose to us for a time, and now we don't need it anymore. And this is quite interesting, because the princess holds her altar, of which is her identity, very close, and she defends it almost with her life. And the queen here has actually been through that when she was younger, that insistence that her identity is not a phase, and then when she looks back on it later, perhaps it's even relatively cringeworthy, because it meant something to her when she was engaged in it, and now she's looking at it with new clarity. She understands what it was. It's not actually silly or stupid. It meant something to her in the time that she had it, but now she doesn't need it anymore, and so she sees things as they are, and she says that is holding us back, that has no more need to be in our life, and so she cuts it off. And that obviously is symbolised here by it being an actual head, perhaps of an old saint. Some have suggested it may be the Hermit card, but I'm not too sure about that. But essentially it is the old thoughts of which would hold us back. And when we start to see something with clarity, we actually naturally start to move out of like these little corners that we've placed ourselves in. And once again, it's all part of going with that flow of life and all of its many experiences that come and go. There is, however, perhaps something a little bit more metaphysical about this severed head. It could be that in this act of severing the head, the consciousness finds itself free from the body, just as the head finds itself severed from the rest of its body that would have walked upon the physical earth. And I know this sounds really quite gruesome at this regard, but it represents a freeing of the mind from the lower self. And so it's a metaphorical symbol of the pure mind, uncontaminated by those things of the world. And one of the things that people actually experience with things like the near-death experience is when they find themselves free from that body, they actually see things with a great clarity, and they see things they describe as more real than real and that type of thing, because all of a sudden their conscious expression of everything is free from, those creeds and schools and religions and cultures and families of which made them think in certain ways. And she is carrying this head and this awareness or consciousness up towards her throne with her, and her throne is made out of clouds, of which represent, of course, air. And clouds can form into shapes by the passage of air, and we can see things in them for a temporary time, and then they fade away. And so it shows that that world of form really comes and goes and returns us yet again to that going with the flow of the changing forms and patterns of the earth. It also represents that her way of speaking to us and getting through to us is through pure intellectual thought, because the air is the power of the mind and the power, if you like, of speech and the way of which we actually communicate with each other through our physical bodies. She doesn't go for the emotion, and she doesn't go for like the fire and flame and all that like we saw with the wands. Instead, as she speaks to us intellectually, and by doing that she brings a clarity of understanding to the things around us. And so that's why the sky in the card is very clear. It's showing the clearness of thought, and that her crown is made again out of these crystalline structures which represent the physical world, and yet here they are very clear and clean. And so it shows again that she's showing us the physical things around us, uncontaminated by the things of which make them take on personas of where they may appear to be something they are not. And so this queen will show us that there are no monsters under the bed, and will direct us to look at things with a different perspective, such as if we approached the famous curtain from a different angle, we would see that all of the effects caused by the wizard are actually nothing of the sort. And so this is why we see the character of the cherub on top of her crown, and actually central in the middle of her actual character design. And so the cherub here represents that purity of thought. And of course it's a baby, it's a young child, and so it can mean looking at things, with the perspective of fresh, new and innocent eyes type of thing. It can also be more mystically representing protection or the sacredness of life, the inner spiritual life, which is separate here from the outward consciousness, the lower realms. And so, as we know, the crystalline structure in the Thoth cards, such as her crown here, represents the physical things, the building blocks of all the things around us. The cherub is part of this, and so it shows that really all of those things around us come from that same source. They come from that purity, and the cherub could almost be in the position of Kether right at the top if we superimposed a tree of life over the actual card. And so it's showing when we do see things with purity and with clarity, even though she is a very intellectual and physically focused card, we inevitably come to the conclusion that they all come from that same source, and that love and innocence and beauty really is the core of the whole thing. And so to get the card means that we're going to see that in some way, but we have to cut through our old habits. We have to sever the things of which are holding us down. We then have to look at them with fresh eyes, just like we are that young child, and see them for what they truly are. See them without the fears of which have been superimposed over them by the world, or the media telling us that we have to fear whatever they are trying to push for the moment, because it will only change again later. And so she's saying, cut through it. Don't be emotionally bogged down by these things. Use logic, use fact, cut through them, see what they really are. She's in many ways a really good counsellor, this mother character. She'd be a really good mother to the princess, because she understands everything the princess has gone through, and so she really is full of wisdom and of intelligence. She has worn many different masks throughout her time, and so she understands that we only wear them for a time, and then when we take them off we are liberated, we have learned lessons from them, and we move on, seeing things with the eyes of the young child reborn into a new world of our creation. The Prince of Swords is a fast-moving and interesting card, of whom elementally is air of air. And so this is an abundance of air, or an excess of mind activity. And so he's moving really quickly throughout all of his thoughts and all of the things he wants to experience. And yet perhaps he's not sticking around long enough to find a deeper meaning in them. On this Rider-Waite card of the Knight of Swords, we can see the character is charging onwards really quickly against the flow of the air. His sword is raised up into the sky and he's charging on. Nothing's going to stop him. Interestingly enough, on this Rider-Waite card, he's also travelling from right to left. And so he's travelling from the right brain to the left brain, or from the world of the mind and the creativity into the physical world. So he's putting into manifestation all these thoughts that are coming into his mind, and because he's moving quickly, the thoughts themselves are changing very quickly with that. So this character isn't going to be sticking around for very long, no matter where he is. On the Tree of Life, he's in Tifereth, and Tifereth sees the largest number of Sephiroths cross through it, and so it's a really interesting one. It is very balanced and harmonious, and yet it's quite interesting as this Prince of Swords is here, in that Tifereth is Kether, or pure spiritual light, but lower down, so on a lower element, a lower frequency. And yet it's obviously of a higher frequency than Malkuth and these lower spheres. And so it's a little bit like a child's older brother. He may appear to be very grown up and very wonderful to somebody of whom is lower on a frequency level than what he is. Although, if we understand him for what he is, he's actually much lower than what he could be and what his potential could be. So a child may feel their little brother is really grown up and quite wonderful, and yet when we look back on it later, we realise that he was only 18 himself at that time, and so he still was rising up into the best version of himself that he could be. The background of this card, however, is actually quite chaotic, and so there isn't going to be a lot of time for reflection with this character. It's all of the air, of course, the air representing mind activity, thought activity, and so all of this that you can see moving around like a storm almost in the breeze are all of the thoughts and all of the wants and experiences and desires coming in and out of his mind. And he is flying through these thoughts, literally, because these circular spheres here in yellow are actually supposed to represent wings. And we can see the wings on these characters beneath as well, which we will return to. And so he's actually flying through the thoughts, and the wings represent the quality of air. They have the element of air inside of them, and of course the colour yellow represents that element of air as well. And so he is riding on the currents of his thoughts and his desires, and he will stop at nothing to experience these desires, even if they are only temporary, because he is actually riding towards them on a chariot. And this chariot is being pulled along by these winged characters, of whom there are three, of course representing that Trinity, yet again, of which we have seen. And they're also quite fairy-like, and they're also small, and so they're kind of like winged children or fairy beings. And as children, they're going to be very easily distracted by things around them. There is that element of distraction going on in this card. If your chariot was being pulled along by these beings, of whom literally seem to be going in all manner of different directions, the chariot would certainly be in motion and potentially moving very quickly, but its destination would be not entirely sure, because it would be moving from one place to the next based merely upon the temporary state of the mind. And so these fairies could be described as flights of fancy. They are a perfect representation of those thoughts that come and go in our mind. And so for people of whom try to meditate, they often say, I can't meditate because there's all these thoughts coming into my mind, very mundane things like what to get for the shopping, and I need to wash the pots and things like that. And of course this is the activity of the mind which distracts us and pulls us into different tangents, and people see it perhaps perfectly with today's world, where they go on the internet to look up a specific thing, and 3 hours later they're reading about something completely unrelated, because they have allowed themselves to be pulled along in their chariot by the whims and flights of fancy of the mind. They have essentially let these small, energetic children pull their mind along. They haven't taken control of the reins and said, this is where I'm going, and that's going to be it. And so, of course, spiritually speaking, that can be a bit of a problem, because you're not actually aiming to a particular goal. And yet, in some ways, he is aiming towards a goal. He just doesn't stick around long enough to see it fully come to fruition. And so you can see he's got a sword held in his right hand, and the colour of this, being that orange or yellow, is again that element of air and the element of the mind. And so this sword is the idea. Of course, it's the dream, the desire, the want of which comes into the mind, because it is on the right hand side, that space of creativity and intellect. And so this is the actual forming of what he wants to experience. It's that little voice in his head that says, go over there and do that. And yet, in his left hand, he holds the opposite for this, of which is actually a scythe or a sickle. And this represents Saturn and death and Father Time and all those things that we've seen over on the Major Arcana, for example. And so he's creating things and then he's destroying them. And so he's actually going all out to get to wherever he wants to go, and then when he gets there, he says, right, I've seen that. Doesn't mean anything to me. I'm going on to something else. It could be described as a type of frantic and never-ending search for something perhaps subtle, of which you would need to actually invest more time in to uncover. And so it reminds me a little bit of how some people hop from different religion to religion, and they only stick around for a short period before thinking there's nothing of value in it. And people of whom do things like hill bagging, where they climb up to the top of hills and say, right, I've done that one, and move on to another. They don't slow down and literally stop to smell the flowers, so to speak. And roller coaster cred counting, people who visit theme parks just to tick off that they've done all the different rides, instead of slowing down and actually experiencing the magic and the experiences of which are available to them. But they have to go slower. They have to stop that chatter of the mind and say, this isn't just something to be ticked off. It's something that could actually have that spirit within it, and that answer of which I seek, if I would only give myself and it the time to communicate it to us. And so this prince really is a bit like that. He's going off all over the place, and if you met him, he would be really energetic and he'd be really passionate. But then when you come back to him, he's already moved on to something else. And that's because he's not grounded. His chariot is literally floating through the air, and because of these fairies moving off in different directions, they could be blown off course very easily because of the change in the air. And so he might not even get to where he was originally going in the first place. And yet his mind is occupied with the comings and goings of experience, and that's why he has this helmet or crest upon his head in this deep orange or yellowy colour. This is said to bring us back to Tifereth, and so upon his head is that sphere where all of the different experiences of the universe are crossing through and coming and going. And he wants to experience them all, even if only for a short period. The entire card is quite jagged and geometric in its patterns, and this brings us of course to that large central pattern upon the card, of which represents Hod, because it has 8 separate sides to it if we were to view it in its full 3-dimensional form. Therefore, it would represent the intellect, and also the taking hold of energy and moulding it into separate forms of which we can identify. So it's like getting hold of clay and creating separate things out of it. They're all made out of clay, and yet we can say, well, that one is a bowl, and that one is a little figure of a man, and that one's a jug. It's actually all clay, but we understand the separate forms. They are distinguishable to us. The geometric pattern in general is this. It is all of the things of which make up the physical world around us, It's a representation of, atoms and molecules and all that type of thing, of which have literally been formed into things around us, of which we understand. It's all energy and vibration and waveform, and yet it's been moulded into shapes of which mean something to us, and it's easy for us to communicate their meaning. Here is, in many regards, the true meaning of this card, in that because he's moving so quickly throughout all these things, he doesn't actually see that there is that core to them, and that they're all made out of those same geometrical shapes, of which of course are, at their core, Kether, spiritual light, and all literally the same thing. And so when you get this card, it can really say you need to slow down and partake in the lessons and the deeper experiences that we can learn from all these things around us, instead of just skimming by them on a surface level. And this prince, if we were to meet him, might be able to explain very well and very quickly how something works and how it all fits together, but not what it actually means, either on a personal or on a societal level, so to speak. And so the card could say that the ideas in our lives perhaps need extra time to develop. By merely planting our ideas and watering them for a time before abandoning them, they will never have enough time to bloom. And if we don't give them enough time to grow and to bloom, we will never actually be able to see their colours, because by the time they have come to show us their wonder, we've moved on to something else, and the lessons of which we could have learned, we have left behind us. The Princess of Swords is actually a really human card, and I think there's something in her that we can all recognise somewhat in ourselves. The Rider-Waite version, the Page of Swords, shows something far simpler. We see that strong element of air brushing against our page here, and she's steadying herself against this change of atmosphere and using this sword really to ask herself where it is that she wants to go. It's suggesting she's perhaps moving against the currents and forging out a path in life, and this card really is about that suggestion of youth in some ways, and that's why we can see something of her in us, because we've all been through that. And so on the Tree of Life, for example, she's Malkuth, and all the princesses are associated with the world of Ayazaya, the world of making. So she's trying to make her kingdom. She's trying to forge out a place, if you like, where she belongs, which is something which is very much within that realm of youth, and we're going to see that throughout this card. It's all the different things of which we hold dear to us, looking for identity, looking for that somewhere we belong. So the making of our kingdom there, Malkuth in Isaiah. She wears upon her head this helmet, and it's quite difficult to actually see on the card, although it is said to be the crest showing Medusa's head. So that's the goddess, of which of course we see in classical civilization, and in Crowley's literature she's associated with Aquarius as well. And this is quite an interesting symbol here, because of course Medusa has that goddess face and the snakes for hair, and you turn to stone if you look at her. And so in one regard this is showing that she has, of course, that attribute about her. She could be quite intimidating, she could be quite fierce in some way. She would be the type of person to shout you down if she didn't agree with you. She wouldn't take any rubbish from anybody, so to speak. And yet also Medusa is that symbol of, a bit like the evil eye, guarding against that which would come for us. So it's that repelling or stopping of the negative. And so whatever she is looking at here, and we will actually learn what she's looking at a little later, she perceives as negative and wants to put a stop to it. And as we can see, it's not quite actually as simple as that, because as well as this helmet, she also wears a pair of sandals, and it's again quite difficult to see, but these sandals are talaria, or winged sandals, of which we may associate with Hermes and of Mercury, that element of air coming up, which is of course all throughout those swords cards, the world of the mind and the thoughts. And so that's showing that this struggle that she is engaged in, she's clearly engaged in some type of conflict, is to do with her thoughts. It's not a physical battle, it is a battle of the mind. But more interestingly, these winged sandals also show up with the character of Perseus. Now, Perseus is given these sandals in order to help him defeat Medusa. And so there we have a true conflict there showing up in these cards. She's both inhabiting the elements of Medusa and wearing a symbol of which would defeat Medusa. So what this is showing is that as she carries on her journey through life, walking the path that she is on with these shoes, of course, that perhaps she will understand more about those things in front of her, which is of course the world of which as a young person she is just stepping into, and those things of which she wanted to stop and turn to stone, so to speak, she will understand more about. And so she may feel temporarily conflicted there. Does she want to stop this force coming to her, or does she need to learn more about it? And so we see that give and take of different elements there, which is very symbolic of youth. And the princess here looks like she is trying to guard herself from this coming storm. In fact, the background of the card is actually very chaotic. It certainly looks quite angry in some way, and there's a blowing of the breeze like we saw on the Rider-Waite, although here it appears much more like a violent storm, that sort of thing. And she's pointing her sword there in a downwards position, so she's pointing it towards Malkuth, which is kingdom. She wants to understand her place in the world. And it is also said here that by doing this, she is trying to imitate what she has seen in her mother, that of course being the Queen of Swords. And so it may suggest that her mother has imparted something of this wisdom onto her. This sword in this position represents intellect and analysis, and so it's saying that she has been taught to look at these things that are blowing around on these winds in front of her and to analyse them and to understand them. And of course that's something that we see as we're growing up. She is a young princess just out on her exploration of the world, and we really see this quite powerful symbol here which ties all this together, which is what she appears to be guarding. You can see that she is fiercely protective of this behind her, of which is an altar. And an altar, of course, is a place of sacred reflection, even the dwelling place of a deity, and also the centre of a culture and a belief, such as we see with all the different types of churches and temples that we see around the world. Here, this represents her identity, and she is fighting here to protect her identity, the things in her life which give her meaning, which help her to find that place she feels she belongs. And so the fact that she's trying to protect this against the storm shows that perhaps she feels that identity is actually under threat in some way. And just like we see in youth, where we have phases and trends that we cling to, and people around us may think they look rather silly, we feel that we're not respected in that regard. Now, Crowley actually describes this in the Book of Thoth as that she is defending the profanation of the altar. And what that means is that she is protecting it from disrespect, or certainly what she sees as disrespect. And so we see throughout our lives that we may cling to a particular fad or trend, and to the people around us it may look rather silly, and they say, "What are you doing?" And we feel we're disrespected because of that. The error here is not understanding that it does mean something to the person in the time that they come to, inhabit it or wear it or whatever it may be, because otherwise they wouldn't actually feel drawn to it. It has to mean something to them. It might not, however, stay around forever, and we can see underneath her altar the plumes of smoke or the elements here that she stands upon appear to be almost skull-like in their patterns. And what this suggests is that as we move on from those fads and trends, they die to us. And so even though she protects her identity fiercely, she has actually changed her identity multiple times already. Or in terms of pure symbology, she has perhaps worshipped at a different altar, that sort of thing. And so, things come into our lives, they mean perhaps a great deal to us, and then we learn from them, and we move on, and we leave them behind. And of course, in that way we become transformed by them. And so that pinwheel here pattern behind her, which we've seen all throughout the Swords cards, representing the turning of the mind and the chatter of the mind and that sort of internal voice that we have. It almost is positioned in a way here to represent like a butterfly. It's like a pair of wings on her back, and so she's almost fairy-like in some way. It's really quite a nice design. And of course that butterfly image is one purely of transformation and of growth. And so as these identities change with the weather and with the plumes of smoke and whatever, she is actually becoming transformed because of them. And yet she stays her ground and she defends what in that moment, because of course in this storm everything changes very, very quickly. And yet in that moment she stands her ground and protects what is important to her. She wears a quite gossamer looking shroud which shows off her deep green colour, and this really shows off her core of her being here, which could be comprised out of something such as Venus, and it could represent her creativity and her will, which is connected to the green earth, and of course of nurturing and that type of thing of which we see there. And so really she's actually very powerful, and she's perhaps much more powerful than what she even realises at this stage in her journey. When you get this card, it's saying that just like this agile and energetic princess, we should explore those things of which find meaning to us and be inspired by them to, if you like, communicate to the world what matters to us in this moment. And yet also we understand that certain things are superficial and temporary, and that they only mean something for a time, and so perhaps it's not worth fighting them to the extent that it would actually damage us, because we may actually move on from them and become transformed by them. This princess is agile and very energetic. She keeps her balance really well. She's actually quite a good character, and so to get this card, it can represent something of that vigilance, and the inquisitive nature of her could be of benefit to you at this time in your life. Speak out those things that mean something to you. Hold them in your heart and defend them, for with them most certainly comes lessons that will help us in our long journey throughout the universe. The Knight of Discs is quite different from most of the other knights. He's less concerned with battle and conquest, and instead appears to be admiring the wonder of the natural world, of which he is very much concerned with here. The Rider-Waite card of the King of Pentacles shows something akin to a Lord of the Earth. He's covered with abundance, and a lot of this is the natural world as well, like what we have seen, and he admires everything of which has been born out of this world. Now, this card is the fiery part of Earth. It is fire of Earth, and so we might think immediately of things like volcanoes and earthquakes and natural disasters, forest fires, and yet it can also be the activity of the earth as a giver of life, which is how Crowley describes this. And so just as the sun of course provides light for life to actually grow upon the earth, we put our intention into the earth to create harvest and make a fertile earth. We are inspired by the natural wonder of the world to cultivate it and to help it to grow. And so in many regards the fire in earth can be our spark of caring for our world and also the spark of life itself in that seed, in that potential of life in the actual Mother Earth itself. We can see this as well with the Tree of Life, where he is Shokmar in the world of Isaiah, the world of making, and so he is will and force and energy put through there, and he's focusing it very much in the things of the physical world, what he can create, what he can cultivate out of the earth, and see that it is beautiful and see that it is good. Like he's paused here and he's looking out at that vista of the sun, and he is admiring the poetry of reality. He's sensing that feel of wonder that we get, when we look at the sunrise or the sunset and all of the beauties of the world, and we're bowled over by it. It just feels magic in some regard. That is what he is sensing here. And his horse also has come to a rest, and you'll notice that his horse, it's a Shire horse. It's not a horse of which is done up for battle. It's got no armour or fearsome insignia on it or anything like that, and its posing here is said to represent it being at rest. Its feet are firmly planted on the ground, it looks at peace, and as Crowley lets us know in the Book of Thoth, because its feet are planted on the ground, it's different from the other knights of which rear up, and they're charging into battle and all this type of thing, where this one has come to rest. And we also see that he's not a knight or a king of whom is going into battle from the position of his helmet. So his helmet's not covering his face, so he's not expecting an attack. He's got it raised up so that his face is free to admire this beauty of the world. And of course, from the perspective of a knight, that would be a vulnerable position to have your face uncovered like that, and so obviously he feels perfectly safe and at home in this place where he is. And upon his helmet is the crest of the stag. And this is a very powerful symbol and has many different meanings, and of course, with this being a very agricultural image, we go back to some of the earliest deity archetypes, of which always had the horns like the stag and the deer, such as Cernunnos, and it's even believed that some of our early ancestors may use these horns as a type of headdress, perhaps to actually feel themselves as part of the spirit of that animal or so on, such as those headdresses found at the archaeological site of Star Kar. We also see in medieval folklore a strange image of stags eating snakes or stamping on serpents to kill them, representing overcoming the devil, of course, overcoming the dark forces of the world, and when they eat the serpent, it was symbolic of them receiving the wisdom of the serpent, receiving its spirit, and so they would also shed their physical skin, of which would be old age and death and illness, because of course this is what the serpent is seen to have done, and so it represents something of man's search for meaning and for spiritual enlightenment, such as we see with the pursuit of the white hart, the white stag, in folklore and mythology. The stag could represent the chasing of new adventures, of new experiences of that wonder of the world, which is why it is never actually caught in this folklore. It is something that cannot be captured. There is a hidden nature underneath it, and of course, in a more simple way, the stag symbology can also be of a male sexuality, such as we see with the god Pan and various other nature deities of that respect, going right back to Cernunnos yet again. It really is quite a multifaceted symbol there. We'll also see that he's not carrying a sword or any type of battle implement at all. In fact, in his hand is an implement known as a flail, of which is a threshing tool. It's something of which would be swung at the grain in order to loosen the husks for harvest. It's a very ancient tool going back to some of the earliest generations of farmers, of which were often grain harvesters. And we also see this in ancient Egyptian folklore, where the symbol of the flail associated with the pharaoh, of whom of course here is the knight, the king, symbolises his ability to provide for his people, to give them a large and fruitful harvest, and so it's a really positive symbol. We've probably actually seen this on the famous sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, of which he holds the symbols of the crook and the flail, the shepherd's crook and the threshing flail. And these are symbols also of the deity Osiris, of which we have seen many times throughout the Thoth Tarot, and he as well is a god of agriculture, of fertility, like we've seen with those horns, and also of a type of resurrection, which is of course something that our knight here would see all around him. He looks at the sun, he sees it go down at night and come up again in the morning, and his harvest, of course, he sees it come and go with the yearly cycle. And he holds his shield towards the sun as if to, actually it looks like it's literally being warmed by the rays of the sun, of which are emanating from this, and so it's impregnating it with the energy of the sun. Now whatever is actually on this shield is hidden from us, perhaps suggesting of course that the secrets of nature are never truly revealed to us. Of course, like we saw there is that hidden aspect that can never be captured, like the white stag. It can be chased, it can be seen, glimpsed at, and perhaps sometimes we can unpick and attempt to understand small things about it, but it will never reveal its true face to us. And yet if we looked at what this symbol most likely would be, some have suggested it would be the earth pentacle of the Golden Dawn, of course, would be a hidden symbol in itself as well, so it fits in with that. And it's a simple interwoven pentacle, of course, and as above and so below. It represents the spirits of nature coming together to create the manifested world, which is the harvest that we can literally see happening around us on this card. It's a interesting card, this. It really represents in some ways the rest after the toil in the fields, but of course it will be a hard work that he's done. He's not going to have an easy time threshing this harvest, just as he hadn't had an easy time planting the seeds in the first place, and yet he knows that it's a wonderful thing, he knows that it is good, and so he has this deep, respect and connection with the earth beneath his feet. And so when you actually draw the card, it's one of abundance, of course, and it's one of taking a great ownership and an understanding of abundance. So it's a card of wealth, and it's a card of a great security, because one knows that when that sun sets it's going to come back up again, and one knows if they've planted the seeds and put that hard toil in, that one day they too can sit back like this and admire the fruits of their labour and give thanks and see the beauty and wonder of all of the things around them. It's a really good card, and to draw it certainly represents good things to come in the harvest of your own manifestations, of which you have brought into your own life. The Queen of Discs is a mature mother character, of whom here surveys the physical world, of which she has created, and of which is her home. The Rider-Waite character also shows this gazing into the world of being, the world of which has been created, and you can see something of that abundance growing behind her with this natural world of which blooms. She is the watery part of earth, and these go well together. Of course, water and earth create life, and they also nurture life once it is already here. So some believe that life itself actually began by some strange communion in the deep oceans, and we crawled out onto the land and we began our civilizations, our lives here, around the Mother Ocean, around the lakes and rivers and places that give us life. And so she looks out here over this landscape, and you can see a river running through it, and it's quite a harsh looking landscape, and we're going to return to it later, but to me it looks like the cradle of civilization, which is exactly that. It's the starting of life being literally built out of sandstone and out of natural materials, homes, cities, civilizations, all building up around the banks of the rivers, because the rivers give life and sustain it in a perfect equilibrium. We can see that as well with the Tree of Life. So as a queen, of course, she's Binah, and she's Binah here, especially in the world of Isaiah, so it's that physical world of making. And so this card is very physical. It can be about our actual bodies, or the things around us, our homes and the things that we have, so to speak. And yet, Binah is also ruled by Saturn, time, and so there is an impermanence to the things of which are actually born after being nurtured here in this womb of Binah. And so, as well as just literally giving birth to physical form, she could represent its impermanence, and therefore its cycle, this cosmic dance of birth and death and rebirth, seen in everything in nature, of which she surveys across this landscape here upon the actual card. And the symbols on this card can all be interwoven with each other to expand upon its meaning. And so firstly here we can see the image of a goat balanced upon a golden ball or a golden globe. This is its astrological association, and it's heavily weighted towards Capricorn. And Capricorn, shown literally on top of the world, can be that symbol of which we see with the goat. So the mountain goat, in folklore and in symbology, climbs to the top of the mountain in a symbol of overcoming the struggles of which it would find. It has to be strong, it has to be determined and have a lot of perseverance in order to actually reach the summit. And of course, if we look at that in a human way, when we reach the summit, we have that sense of accomplishment and that sense of sitting back and surveying the land around us and saying, look at this, I've actually scaled this mountain. And Crowley would have understood that, of course, because he was an accomplished mountaineer in life as well, and so I think he would have actually enjoyed seeing that symbology here. The goat also has long horns, and so this suggests that it is of some great age, and it represents all its experience in life, and so it has a lot of wisdom. It has literally, perhaps, ascended the mountain. It's seen all the different winters and summers and the struggles and joys of which come with them. And we also see that on the Queen herself. She wears a helmet of which has these very large goat horns upon them. And they are actually the horns of the Markhor, wild mountain goats, of which are seen in the Middle East around Afghanistan and places like that. And these are literally mountain goats, and the horns on them have this wonderful spiral pattern, suggesting the natural cycles and dances of the cosmos, just as we began with in this symbology. And this shows, first of all, that the Queen herself is somebody of whom has experienced a lot, so she's not like the princess who is just discovering the world. She has already been through it. There's a great deal of wisdom about her, symbolised by these horns, and also it shows that she has come to this point that she's sitting in, of which is a fertile landscape. You can see all these green foliage and trees around her. She's come to this at the end of a long journey, so you could literally believe that she's come across this landscape in front of her and climbed literally to the top of this mountain, just like the goat, a symbol of a long life, the journey of life, and all of the stories it could tell. And of course, if she has had that long life, she will have seen a lot change, and she will have changed herself with it, grown with it as those horns grow. And so that's why we can see that her dress has these scales upon it. It looks almost like a snake, a sort of reptilian image. And this shows an endless capability for renewal, to shed the skin, to literally change her outfit. And when she changes her outfit, just as we do when we put on different clothes, we feel good, or we dress for the occasion and so on like that. She grows, she understands the situations that she's in and dresses or acts in accordance with how she should or how she has learnt to for that situation. And with it she continually grows, not just in age physically, but of course in wisdom and in experience. Now she holds in her right hand the wand, and this has upon it a crystalline symbol showing a cube, and inside the cube is a hexagram. And so here we have a symbol of the sun and the earth, so the hexagram, of which has 6 sides and therefore represents Tifereth, which is ruled by the sun, is of course the light of life. And just as we saw with the water, is something of which allows life to grow, as we see with the plants and the photosynthesis, like literally growing towards the sun physically. And the cube around it represents the earth. And so it is a firmament of the earth. It's a bit like in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, where we say, within this earthen bowl we call the sky, whereunder, crawling, cooped, we live and die. This earth and this sun of which allows days to pass and things to grow is our home, and everybody of whom has ever lived has lived here on the earth. Every, man of great wisdom and every evil leader. They've all lived here and they've all seen the sun go up and the moon come up and so on. And so it really is quite a humbling image as well. And yet, as well as that, the wand with this symbol upon it can represent the fertility of the earth, of course. The sun and the earth and the water all coming together brings life. And if we have a look at the wand as well, it has this serpentine image snaking around it, of which is in many regards symbolic of the Kundalini awakening, which is the serpentine energy of which we see in yoga, of which rises up the spine, symbolised here by the wand, starting from the root chakra, and the energy rising right upwards until it bursts out of the head at the crown chakra in samadhi, or enlightenment, of which is symbolised here, of course, by the crystalline earth and sun brought together. This symbol also is similar to the symbology we began with, the goat climbing up the mountain, the growth and the enlightenment and the clarity of vision of which comes the higher that it climbs up. And we also see this again with the next symbol, of which is the orb of which she actually holds within her left hand. And this shows an image of a cosmic dance within it, these circles. And there are actually 13 different circles on here. And so this is rather esoteric. This brings us back to the Tree of Life. This is the 13th path upon the Tree of Life, of which connects Tifereth and Kether, and it's also associated with the Priestess tarot card, and therefore by extension as well the moon, and of course all the things that come with that, the intuition and so on. And this going from Tifereth to Kether is the same thing that we've seen again, of course, the rising of energy back to the white light at the top, the source, the singularity, however you choose to actually interpret it, the enlightenment and the wisdom of which comes from it. And also Tifereth is beauty. Of course, that's how it's often described. It's that central point on the Tree of Life. And so this path, the 13th path, shows that in order for this equilibrium of the Tree of Life itself to take place, the will must eventually find itself in beauty, and only then, of course, can it unite with that perfect intelligence from where it comes from, the coming back together with the one, and all that sort of imagery. And this brings us to true will, that we see in Thelema. Love is the law, love under will. The love is, of course, the beauty of which we see here, and that our true will is that of which leads us to love, that universal uniting intelligence, on the realisation of love itself in that regard. That she has these type of symbols on her, of course, shows that she is literally a mother figure. She is very nurturing, and she helps us to uncover the paths that would take us towards that true will. And we can even see that symbolised literally on the card. We have the sun, as we've seen there, underneath the goat with the orb, and we have the moon above it here, which is represented by the 13 circles, because the moon is associated with the priestess, of which is associated with the 13th path. And so, of course, she is perfectly balanced. She has completed this journey emotionally stable. She has learnt a lot, of which has enabled her to understand her emotions and nurture her heart, and all of the other people of which that she will see as well. So again, it's literally a motherly figure, and somebody of whom helps us to understand our intuition, and therefore helps us to get on the right path for our journey, because she has had this journey. She has walked this crooked mile, and we can see that the background of the card is almost desert-like. It's quite a barren landscape, and so it will have been a difficult journey to actually get to this fertile land that she's in. She, however, was guided by the river. It looks like she's followed the path of the river, of which represents, of course, her following the true will, the spiritual guiding force, like a spiritual sat-nav, which is her intuition and things like that, which has actually led her towards it. And then she imparts that wisdom onto us. So she says it's a hard journey, but figuratively, there's an oasis here that you can stop at, and get a drink, and there's some trees here that you can find shade under. She's seen it, she's lived through it, and so we should listen to her because she knows what she's talking about. And so when you get the card, it's very physical, and it's also that very motherly and nurturing sort of card. It often can represent a person, this one, of which could be a literal mother figure, or even a teacher, or something like that. And it can even represent ourselves, our love of family and home and things like that, and of taking care of our bodies, because if you're going to be walking this barren landscape and having a long journey, then you're going to need to eat and drink well and know where your footing should be and all that type of thing in order to actually make the journey in one piece. And so it's about nurturing ourselves in that regard, of course, and keeping ourselves in check both physically, emotionally, spiritually. And above all else, this card is security. She's got to this fertile land. She's come to the end of this journey and she can breathe a sigh of relief and say, here it is. Here is prosperity. Here is what I have worked hard to generate in my life. And so it can be financial security, for example, when you get it in the card. It can be a matter of finally coming to understand an emotionally important part of our lives, having come through something of which above all else has taught us a lesson and helped us see where we have been and where we are to go. The Prince of Discs is a mature and determined prince, of whom explores the world in order to understand its details, so that he can put those elements of knowledge to work in his own journey. The Rider-Waite card of the Knight of Pentacles or Knight of Discs shows something at first glance quite similar, but he appears to be cherishing the pentacle, the sun, the symbol of the world, or even offering it in thanks to the world. The card is elementally air of Earth, and so this might seem like quite a good thing, but they can be quite unstable. If we look at natural phenomena and things like that, they could enable strong gusts of wind, for example, hurricanes, of which would weaken the Earth, and so on and so forth. And so perhaps there is an inherent conflict in this prince's actual personality, and yet he does strive to understand all the details of things. And so on the Tree of Life, he is in Tifereth, so he's right in the centre of the Tree of Life, which of course is all about balance and harmony. And so he takes all of the things of the world around him, all the different Sephiroth, and conglomerates them into one. He says, what can I learn from them all, and how can I put it into my own world to make everything make sense, which is really what the Tree of Life itself is all about. It's a blueprint of the universe. The Tifereth is also all about beauty, of course, in many different interpretations of it, and so we could see him, as the princes often are, as quite dashing, the type of character of whom would look good. He'd care about his body and his appearance, and so we will actually return to that symbol as well as we move on. He, of course, charges forward on this chariot. Again, like a lot of the princes, he's moving very quickly, and he's being pulled along by the bull of Taurus. And also, he wears a helmet with a winged bull as a crest on top of that, and so we can see here a strong element of Taurus. It's very central to the actual card, and so this shows that he actually represents the attributes of Taurus in some regards, and so he would be very kind to us if we were to meet him, but he'd also be really hard working and determined. He wouldn't stop until he'd known all of the details and all of the ins and outs of the things of which he is manifesting. He'd be very sensible, and he would work independently, strong-minded sort of prince. And yet, of course, that could also mean that, at least on the surface, he could come across as rather stubborn or even domineering if we were to look at it on the negative element. And yet, of course, this means that he charges forth into the world with this element of Taurus guiding him. And if we actually look at the chariot itself, it's coloured in black, and so this represents the 10th Sephiroth, of which is Malkuth, the earth, the kingdom. And so his journey to understand is based in the physical world itself. He's less concerned with spiritual enlightenment on the surface. And it may appear when we meet him that, he would be more interested in exploring the world to broaden his mind, for example, because as he broadens his mind and understands, say, different cultures and things metaphorically, then he'd understand people and how they think and how they build and, how their lives go together. And of course, this is how we learn, and it's how we have learnt throughout history. Agriculture itself is something of a mystery. We don't really know how farming or the Neolithic actually started, but when it did, it spread far and wide. And this is obviously because travelling groups and communities have spread ideas and techniques, and they've taught people how to till the land and how to grow the crops. And we literally learnt how to care for the earth, and with it, the earth, of course, has taken care of us with our food and our drink, and it's a balance, just as we saw with Tifereth there in the Tree of Life. And so we can actually see this with the orb of which he holds in his left hand. Now this, first and foremost, is a symbol of the sun, and so it could be Tifereth, and yet it can also be the sun as the giver of life in agriculture. And so these court cards on the discs are very agricultural. They're often concerned with harvest and obviously the fruits of our labour, because they are the final court cards upon this tarot journey. And he holds this in order to show that he understands it. He knows how to till the land, like we've seen. And so the globe, in one way, could look almost like an orrery or a map of the cosmos, and so it could represent him understanding and mastering the seasons, the day and night cycle, and when to plant the seeds and when they would harvest. He's literally learnt all that and put it to physical use. And it also looks a bit like a blueprint, because there are all these symbols in the middle of it, which are very difficult to actually see, but Crowley describes them in the Book of Thoth as a cross, a cube, and 3 circles, and so these represent him literally laying out a plan on how to do this. And so it can be a plan on how to build, or in agriculture, of course, how to plant and reap and sow. And so it shows he is gaining a mastery over the earth. He's figuring out, if you do this, then you get that result. And he's essentially writing it all down and figuring out how to improve upon it all the time. And in his other hand, so in his left hand, is the companion to this, which is a more spiritual symbol because of the balance, of course. And so this is the orb and scepter. Now this is used in the coronation of monarchs. We actually saw it at the time of making the video not so long back with the coronation of King Charles III. He holds the orb and scepter, and it has many different meanings. In royalty, it often represents that the power of the monarch actually comes from a higher power, that being God or the grand architect of the universe, which is a fitting symbol for this card because, of course, he, the prince, is an architect, as we can see with that blueprint symbol. And by extension, if the monarch's power comes from God, then we have an orb and scepter, suggesting that also the power and the life on earth itself comes from God. And so everything comes back to that higher power and balances itself perfectly. And so if we have a look at the actual orb and scepter on the card, the bottom of it is hidden in the chariot, and so it's hidden in Malkuth, in the physical kingdom. And of course it rises upwards to the orb and scepter at the top, and so again it's the awakening experience here depicted. So metaphysically, it's a symbol of esotericism, the great work of as above, so below, the rejoining of the macrocosm and microcosm, so the rising of ourselves from the kingdom back to union with our creator. And of course it's all about a balance, and so if we look at this with an agricultural bent to it, because of course that's literally what he's doing on the card, it's showing that our soul, our spirit, our consciousness is housed within our body. And so, as we began with, this prince cares about his body. He's actually naked on the card, and so it's showing that he's quite well built. He looks after himself. He looks good, and so of course he eats well and drinks well and exercises and that type of thing. And so, in a perfect balance, by nurturing the earth to give us food and water and so on, we in turn nurture our bodies, of which contain within it the spark of divinity of our spirit, and therefore we are healthy and actually able to go out there on these journeys of enlightenment and of exploration, whatever it may be. The prince himself as well, he looks as if he is surveying all this land of which he is travelling through, and he's looking at it with almost a meditation. So he's taking it all in, and again he's trying to understand it and figuring out how he could actually make it grow and how it all fits together. And so again, it's implied with the geometry of the globe in his hand that he is literally surveying the world. So he's saying, here is water, here is land, and here is how it can all come together. And we see it all come together in the background of the image. And so the first image here in the background, and it looks like a tapestry or a curtain. It's a floral image of which shows flowers and fruits, and so this of course is the natural world and the world of agriculture, and also is the element of earth, of course. And then we see behind the chariot as well these strange little globules of air, and so these are of course the passage of air and oxygen and all of the different elements of which travel within it. And so of course if we put them together into their harmonious positions, we have earth and air, of which is what the prince actually represents, and we could literally see him moving on the air through this manifested world. It's actually quite a simple card, to be honest, this one. When you get it, it can represent finding those qualities in yourself, that hard-working and focused determination that you need to make things work. It's basically saying, this is the time to stand up and grow, to take responsibility for the things of which we are putting into harvest. So it's a bit like a moment where you just want to move on to the next step. You want to actually start putting effort into making things better for yourself or making things grow. Is not necessarily a strongly spiritual card. He's more materially focused, and so it could be all about that blueprint, of which is for building, not necessarily for building an actual house or something physical, but for building the blocks of which will house your body, and house inside that, of course, your spirit, and onwards, so that you may be secure and healthy, and therefore able and willing to grow on your journey. The Princess of Discs is a really beautiful card, and she's also very important, because if we were to read the tarot journey in chronological order, beginning with the Fool, then she would be the final card. And so as the court cards usually find their energy descending down into the next suit, here we would actually begin the cycle again, find ourselves back where we had started out from. And so the Rider-Waite card, although it looks very different from the Thoth card, has a green tunic representing the fertility of the earth, and the pentacle is the same colour as the sky, representing that life-giving energy of the sun. And the character also wears this red headscarf. This is all about the heart and the passion of it. And also, rather importantly here, brings us back to the Fool card, the Rider-Waite version shown here, of whom has upon his headdress a red feather, and so we have there a connection and a recycling, a starting again. This card represents Earth of Earth, and so it's very much centred within that body of the Earth, and on purely an aesthetic level it can mean, of course, that our princess here is very physically beautiful. It genuinely is a striking looking card as well. A lot of people reading Thoth feel quite drawn to this card. And of course also the Earth is a pregnant and fertile Earth. It literally gives birth to the plants and the trees, and even to us. It's our Mother Earth. And even more metaphysically than that, it could be seen that the Earth contains within it all of the building blocks of carbon and, atoms and everything to actually make the natural world. And so she, of whom we can actually see is pregnant herself upon this card, carries within her the energy of life. And if we look on the Tree of Life, she's Malkuth. And so, of course, here as well, it would contain within it all of the energies of the Sephiroth from above it. They have all descended down into the world of kingdom, and it's in Isaiah, the world of making. And so it shows a very rooted and grounded princess. And it makes us understand that we're looking at a spiritual journey, and yet we inhabit a physical body, and so we have to see a balance in everything in our lives. If we hadn't have been born in the first place into these forms that we are, we wouldn't have been able to set out on a journey of spiritual enlightenment, or in fact any type of journey, in the first place. That she is in Malkuth here, and also contains within her all of the seeds of life, shows that she is witnessing, or having within her, all of the potential of creation at once. And she is totally at home in her environment. She wears upon her head this ram's head crown, this horned crown, and this symbol is rather multifaceted. It can be associated with Aries, and so she has those qualities of astrologically Aries within her. And the ram has always been seen as a symbol of rebirth and the coming again of the cycle of the year, because sheep and rams are always associated with spring. In fact, that festival of Imbolc, of which happens on the 1st of spring, it's celebrated on the 1st of February, actually means ewe's milk, and it refers to the pregnancy of the ewes and the milk and the birth of the new sheep, and with it, symbolically, the new year. The ram is also kept and treasured by the goddess Brigid, of whom it is associated with that Imbolc festival, and she is a goddess of fertility and motherhood, as well as domesticated animals, and so our Princess of Discs could in some way actually represent something like the goddess Brigid, and indeed she is a very strong and powerful character. Again, the ram's horns, the ram being seen sometimes as a more masculine image because they fight for dominance and so on, and we see it with Cernunnos and Pan. And so it shows that, as well as a loving and nurturing mother, she is strong. She finds herself in an environment where she would stand up for what is right, and if we see her and interact with her, then we would leave feeling very inspired and enlivened both spiritually and physically. The horns also show that she is symbiotically at one with nature, so she doesn't feel separate from the natural world. She understands it deeply, and she is part of the natural world, and so that can also be what those horns represent, as well as the trees behind her. She is in union with them, and we can actually see the roots of the trees, suggesting that they have a long and ancient story, and they are deeply rooted in that Mother Earth, and of course they reach upwards towards the sky in a union with the as above and so below the sky and the earth. she holds this staff within her hands, and it's pointing downwards in the direction, of course, of Malkuth on the Tree of Life. And the tip of her staff, or her spear, is a diamond. And we've seen this symbol many times in the Thoth Tarot. It usually represents the building blocks of life, so things like carbon atoms and electrons and all the things, the frequencies and vibrations that actually make up what we see as the physical world. We imagine them as being little crystalline structures of energy, all clumping together and actually taking form into whatever it is that we see around us as existing. The diamond can also sometimes represent Kether right at the top of the Tree of Life, that divine spark of life, the thing of which actually gave us consciousness, gave us life in the first place, that union with God, as we've seen. And so that she's bringing this down, and it looks like it's actually shining forth into the earth, so it's reflecting the light from the sky. And so this is bringing down the energy and the purity of Kether down into the world. And so this, of course, suggests that everything in the world has that light within it. That the world, the body of the earth, is literally impregnated with the breath of life from a divine source. And this also is similar to what we are seeing here, with this staff coming down and literally implanting that spirit of life into the earth itself. And it shows that even deep underground where these roots are, so the deepest and densest parts of earth, the unlit caverns beneath us, the life crawling around there still contains within it that light inside it, that spirit of Kether, of God, of the Most High. She holds also a shield, and this is quite a lovely symbol. It has, of course, a yin and yang design to it, representing a complete equilibrium and balance, and it's surrounded by 36 petals. This brings us to the 36 different deacons of the astrological wheel. And so again, it's as we began with here, that she represents the completion of a cycle, and it's starting again, it's rebirth once more. And so she's the last card in the tarot deck, and so the whole story begins again with the Fool. She is the completion of this journey through the universe, symbolised here by the journey throughout the different deacons of the astrological wheel. Inside the yin and yang, another rose blooms as well from inside, and this is the lotus of the goddess Isis, of which we have seen before. And this is pretty much the same thing, of course. It's a rebirth and also a fertility with that. So the lotus would be observed at nightfall, closing up and going beneath the waters, before at dawn it rises up out of the water and reopens, and so it actually appears as if it has retreated down, of course, into those waters of life, that womb of creation, or even that it has died. And in the morning when the sun comes back, it comes back and it is reborn for the next day. And of course this also is a symbol of the goddess Isis, a beautiful goddess of whom symbolises much of what we've been discussing throughout this video. And she is also the wife of Osiris and the mother of Horus, the child Horus. And this as well has a thelemic connection to it, because we read about the coming of the Aeon of Horus. This is the world that we are in, and Crowley describes this in much of his writings. He may describe it in little essays towards truth, for example, as the Aeon of Horus representing being freed from the obsession of the doom of the ego in death, and the limitation of the mind by reason. The best men again set out with eager eyes upon the path of the wise. And this Horus Aeon has also been described by Crowley as the crowned and conquering child, of whom dieth not, nor is reborn, but goeth radiantly ever upon his way. Even so goeth the sun. For as it is now known that night is but the shadow of earth, so death is but the shadow of the body, of which veileth his light from his bearer. And so we talk, of course, about these coming of ages, the Age of Aquarius and the Aeon of Horus and all these type of things, of which we have seen with regarding a type of cosmic dance of coming and going, of epochs and times. And we come into this world for but a small moment in that sun and become enlightened, become awakened to the glory and majesty of creation. And so this card is both a beginning and an end. If it represents you as a person or as a person in a tarot reading, it's somebody of whom is following their true will, somebody of whom is completely at home in their environment and is guided by their heart on their journey wonderfully, almost without any type of trouble. Of course, she can also be an actual pregnancy, the coming of a new life into your world, and it could be metaphorically there as well, a birth of a business, an idea, a new home, whatever it may be. But it really is all about a very productive, fertile and quite wonderful time, coming even after a period of lack. And when this period comes, you're going to be in touch with nature. You're going to be connected with all of the world around you and seeing its love and its wonder and the empathy of it. And that empathy, of course, reaches out to us as well. As the student of these cards, she is wrapped in a sheepskin cloak. So she's literally wrapped in the comforts and warmth of this earth, again symbiotically one with that of which she represents. And this cloak extends outwards as if we are also going to become wrapped in it if we are looking directly towards the card. So it's empathizing with us, allowing us the extension of that comfort and warmth, and saying that we've now reached the end of this tarot journey. And the final symbol on this card really does sum this up. Behind her, and very difficult to see, is this symbol, of which is an altar. This is a place of both worship and sacrifice, of course, not necessarily in a physical or gruesome way, but merely suggesting that now that we have gone through a journey of the universe, we finish by kneeling with this goddess by an altar in this beautiful natural and ancient environment. And there have been losses and sacrifices along the way, these being, of course, our fears, our assumptions about things, our learning and going through difficult periods. And then we worship back where we began, and back where we now understand is where life came from, where life dwells now, and where life, however long it will last, shall always dwell, so long as this cycle continues to turn.